Ladies and gentlemen, this is the June 15th meeting of the Subcommittee on Finance and Property and Committee of the Whole for the budget hearings of fiscal year 2023. Welcome, everyone. I don't know everyone's name, so I'm not going to try to introduce you. I'm hoping that someone will. Through the course of this evening, maybe when the superintendent shows up.
She's here.
She is? Where is she? Oh, there she is. Mr. Perry's big head was. Let's, Mr. Ailes, perhaps you could enlist some folks to open some windows, by the way, as we're going through this. Thank you very much. So this evening, we're going to hear from Superintendent Trochek, and welcome. And also a little later from Mike Collins, who is on a Zoom meeting right now, but he should be done by the time we've reviewed the school budget, and he will be up after that. Just to get us going, I ask Mr. Perry to just give the council just a quick overview of the sort of 50,000-foot view of the school and city side spending, given that the school budget is roughly half, to sort of take a step back and take a look at the budget as a whole. So without further ado, Mr. Perry, good evening.
Mr. Chairman, good evening, everybody. Good evening to our friends from the school department. I have somebody's cell phone up here. I don't know who it is.
That's mine, leave it there, don't worry.
Leave it there, don't touch it.
Advance the slides.
Oh, heaven forbid. I'm already in trouble. In any event, good evening, everyone. About 4 o'clock today is his want. The chair of Property and Finance reached out to me and went over some budgetary matters. And he asked me if I would do some quick number crunching so I could present very quickly in advance of the school department's presentation some numbers. He was interested in percentage allocations, not only with the schools, but also on the municipal side. As I reported to you in my document, reported the document a couple weeks ago, and as I orally presented to you, the school budget is going to increase to 69. The request of the mayor, that is $69,343,934. That is a school increase, or an increase from the prior fiscal year of $3,967,527. What I did not do, and I apologize, I'll make sure it doesn't happen again, I should have ran similar numbers on the municipal side. So I did that this afternoon. So what is happening on the municipal side is the mayor is proposing that $81,238,066 be appropriated on the municipal side. That is an increase of $2,434,077, or a 3.08% increase on the municipal side. Now, on the municipal side, I want to be clear, I was talking to the finance director, that includes everything on the municipal side. Police, fire, public works, debt, health insurance, school vocational costs, which did go up quite a bit, state assessments, everything that is on that side. So the bottom line to it is, that's about the allocation of the additional revenue of, or at least the revenue we anticipate coming in of $150 million. I can report, this is my 6th budget with the city of Beverly. The allocation of resources as presented by the mayor is pretty consistent with what he's done in prior years. It's about this rough allocation, and as I've observed, and some of you have done it yourselves, each year the city council has unanimously approved this allocation. So it's the culture of the city of how they do this and how they build their budgets, and it's pretty consistent with prior years as far as how this goes. So you now have at least a handle on how much of an increase you see on the municipal side. And Mr. Chairman, I'm more than happy to answer any questions you or your colleagues may have.
Okay, thank you. I don't know that anyone will have any questions, but I just wanted to make sure that the information was out there, and perhaps as the evening goes on, this maybe something councilors want to review. Are there any questions from members of the subcommittee? And yes, Councilor St. Hilaire.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Perry, and I know we've talked a little bit about this topic in the past, and one thing I know, just looking at this and running some quick numbers, looks like, with the proposed budget, the school side of the total city budget would make up 46%. That's up from 45% last year, it looks like. Based on the history of, what you're suggesting has been our history of giving the schools the bulk of the sort of, increase. Where are most communities in terms of school spending as a total allocation?
Well, I can only do this from anecdotal experience. The city of Beverly does see its public education system as a high priority, both the mayor and the city council, probably a little higher than I see in other communities. There's no right or wrong to this. And I don't even know what the right answers are. I mean, a strong argument could be made. I think I've articulated this in the past, that, funding schools does a whole bunch of good stuff. Socially, economically, it helps increase property values, things of that nature. So, no. Do other communities allocate in this manner? The answer is no. There are some that do, some even more than this, but in general, yeah, the city has done, the mayor and past city councilors have been allocating these resources in this manner, and I would say it's in the higher end of the allocation, but certainly not out of whack either, if that helps.
Yeah, and I guess from a trend perspective, I guess if we were to continue on this path, right, more and more of the total city budget would end up going to the schools, which, again, may be our priority, and I'm not opposed to that, but I guess I'm just sort of curious, are we out of line with what you see in other places, or are we about, right? So I can take that offline, but thank you for your insight.
Yeah, the only thing I'd say this year, the unusual circumstances, which we all know, was there was a substantial increase in Chapter 70. I think about approximately $3 million or 2.9, something like that. So that certainly is driving this conversation that you're about to have with the school committee tonight, school officials, I should say. In terms of, people talk about sustainability, I talked about that quite a bit. Council, actually, I think my first budget, you were here with me at that time, and I was a little concerned, but here I am 6 years later, or 6 budgets later, and I don't know whether, I'm not as worried about the sustainability of this going forward, I guess, if that makes sense. If it's the policy directions of the city council and the mayor to fund the public education the way they do, so far we're okay. I'm really comfortable, as Chairman Hausman knows, we have those financial policies, which I think protects the foundation of the city. Our stabilization funds are healthy. Our balance sheets are healthy. So I can stand here and tell you, in my view, that the fiscal health of the city today is better than what it was when I started 6 years ago. And it wasn't bad back then, but it's even better today. So I don't know, that's a policy decision, as you all know, but as your budget analyst, I'm not uncomfortable where you're at, but again, it's certainly, up to you if you're, this is how you want to allocate the funds.
Thank you, I'm good.
Thank you. Any other councilors have any? Yeah, Councilor Rand.
Thank you. Thank you for this memo and your insight, and I'm glad to hear that you've come around a bit on our spending habits on schools.
Well, I don't think I left anywhere, but that's okay. My job is to bring it to your attention.
I appreciate that. I think it's important just to consider the numbers. So I have one question and one comment, is that the school increase of almost $4 million, does that include the Chapter 70?
Well, that's a great question, which I've discussed with the business manager and the superintendent. The answer is yes. There's two ways of looking at it. One is from an accounting perspective, and the other is how do we build a budget? So from my observations, when Mayor builds his budget, he looks at the Chapter 70 allocation. He will add to the school appropriation whatever the increase, obviously that plus the new money, like I said, this year is quite a bit. And from my experience, he puts approximately a little bit less than half the levy, which is the municipal increase. And that's kind of how I've been watching him build his budget over the years, and that's how he comes to the numbers. That's building the budget. However, from an accounting perspective, which is what I look at, I know Mr. Ailes looks at it, I look at revenues, and then that's one silo, and then I look at expenditures, and I get to the bottom, and do they match? And yes, they do match. As I've indicated, you have a balanced budget, and that's how we do tax rates and balance sheets and audit reports and things of that nature. But the bottom line to it is that's how I see the administration building their budget, and it's along those lines, if that is of hopefully helpful to you.
It is, thank you. And maybe just sort of question/comment. I also think about, when I look at the percentage increase, I not only think about the increase in Chapter 70 money that is designated for the schools, but I think about the sort of the ratio of municipal employees and kind of the school department versus other municipal employees and outside of the school department. And because as we all know, part of what drives budget increases is contractual obligations. So I'm wondering if you could just comment
Sure.
on that.
It's funny you mentioned, I asked that of Mr. Ailes and the human resource manager, the department head, a week or so ago. Don't hold me to this, and I'm sure the schools will correct me here. I think we have in the vicinity of 330 FTEs on the municipal side, and I've been informed, but I'm not, this is hearsay, so don't beat me up. A little less than 1,000, I think, FTEs in the school department. Am I correct in that? 920, thank you, in that area. So your comments are well taken. I mean, obviously, the system in the Beverly Public School system is larger, and as such, as a larger entity, and it's kind of a ratio, if you look at these percentages of FTE count, you're absolutely correct about that. You know, like anything else, though, as Councilor St. Hilaire made, you're still building. You're going to talk about FTEs and things of that nature tonight, I'm sure. But as you keep building that, too, then that allocation is going to have to continue in order to avoid layoffs and things of that nature. I will say this, if I may. I did comment a week ago about one of the things that we do really well here on the budget stuff is making sure we're careful to avoid layoffs. And make sure we have the revenues in there. We do a good job, in my view, on our financial forecasting, which helps quite a bit. There are AAA communities, I'm going to repeat this again, out there. Newton is looking at laying off teachers. Saugus is looking to lay off teachers, as an example. We're not doing that. We're going to have a conversation tonight about adding teachers, which, you know, at least I'd rather have that dialogue than laying off people. So I think the way we handle our finances allows for this conversation to occur, and I'm hopeful and optimistic moving forward that as long as we stay the course of what we're doing with the way we handle our finances, that we will hopefully be able to improve all the services, including the schools.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other councilors? President Flowers.
Thank you. I guess I appreciate this. I have, I believe, an understanding of how Chapter 70 works. I want to make one comment, but then I would respectfully ask if we could, I'm curious to hear from the superintendent. I feel like we're somewhat putting the cart before the horse, because Mr. Perry often opines for us after we've heard from a department head, so I'd love to hear, instead of speculating about what she'll tell us or emptying what she'll tell us, I'd love to hear what she will tell us. But what I've been thinking about with the way that the school's budget looks is that my understanding is Chapter 70 money is increased due to a formula funding change because of the Student Opportunity Act, which in my view means that the state is funding more fairly than it has before. And I guess the superintendent will tell me if I'm wrong about what I'm saying, but in my view, it also says that the state recognizes that we have more students with profound need than we've had before, and that can include ELL learners, that can include students in poverty, students who need supportive services. And so it looks to me like what the city is putting towards the schools, as Councilor Ram was talking about, helps to meet contractual obligations, but that in my view, taking away from the city's contribution, which is not the bulk of what the schools are getting, because the Chapter 70 money is higher, feels a bit to me like taking money from the students with the most profound need. That's why we are receiving the money. I guess that's my take on why Chapter 70 went up. I don't know if that matches what we'll hear, but I think that's an important piece of the conversation.
And some of the comments you made are accurate. I know the superintendent knows this way better than I do, but I think you're spot on in your conversation, yes.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions or comments, then thank you, Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And let's hear from Superintendent Tarocha. Good evening and welcome.
I appreciate the comments and having the table set for our discussion about budget. So, but before we begin, I do want to take a moment. We do have a lot of members of our leadership team here. I'm just grateful for all of them to come. We have a very strong leadership in Beverly. We have a great group of people who are working very hard on behalf of all of our students. So I want to take a moment and thank all of you for coming. I know we've spent a lot of time on the budget, and so we're kind of at the culmination of that point. So I wanted to start first. I have first of all handed all of you the presentation in hard copy, so feel free to follow along as we go. I'll also be presenting it up there. What I tried to do, this budget is a sort of a 6-month project that we have put together. The school committee has spent, since probably early November, we have our first meeting when we begin to talk about budget priorities, and we met approximately maybe 8 or 9 times at which, in some of our meetings, at which we were discussing budget, whether we were talking about the funding formula for Chapter 70 and why we got more money, whether we were talking about what the priorities the school committee had as we move forward, whether I was reporting on the priorities that we had collected from feedback from our stakeholders, whether they were parents, whether they were students, whether they were the union members. We've spent a lot of time doing it. So I think what we're bringing you here tonight is a well-thought-out, well-planned opportunity to share with you how we manage to meet the goals that we set through our budgetary priorities. So I just wanted to sort of start with that and thank everyone that was involved in that process, because it was a long and arduous process, and we worked really hard at that. So the first thing that I will show you is what that process looks like. So as I said, we begin in early November. The first thing that we do is set meetings. I met individually with school committee. We met as a school committee group. I met with union leadership. I met with parent groups. And I met with our principals in central office. And through that, we identify the priorities, and we look to create a shared framework to guide our decisions, because the budget certainly is representative of what we know that we need to do within our schools. We take a look at enrollments and what impact that will have on staffing. We look to identify administrative efficiencies and restructuring opportunities. I think we all know that education in the last 3 years has been a bunch of twists and turns, and we have had many opportunities to make changes, but we wanted to make sure that we didn't if we were bringing in new opportunities, that we were taking a look at what were they replacing, and so not to just continue to add, but make sure that we were being efficient in some of those restructuring opportunities. We reviewed requests for funding from the various departments. We collaborated with the city to kind of determine what that proposed city contribution would look like in relationship with the school budget. We took that draft proposal, and again, over 4 or 5 meetings with the school committee, we went through the budget and looked at what was there, and came up with a draft proposal, which we presented at our public hearing on May 11th. The school committee then held their vote at the end of that, at the end of the regular school committee meeting on May 11th, and approved the budget that's being presented to you here today. So that is the budget process that we go through. It's kind of funny, we're kind of heavy on this from November until May 11th, and then we sort of took a breather, and then I noticed you're all diving into the city budget, and so you've been back to back to back for the last few nights. So I empathize with you for that, I have to say. This is our calendar. It's kind of hard to see there, but this is the calendar of all the meetings that we have. We present this calendar in early November so that the committee and the public is aware of what process we're going to be going through and when meetings will be held. So we certainly have, those are open meetings, and we welcome anybody to come and join us in the process. But again, and I know that if you've seen me present before, that's not coming through quite exactly right, but we always, everything that we do when we're thinking about our budget is based on the goals that we set. So in the past month, we've presented a new district improvement plan to the school committee, and each one of our individual schools have presented their individual school improvement plans, and they're based on the district goals that we set as a group. Those district goals are really under large areas that if when we're looking at the budget process, if the item or the proposal that's coming through doesn't fit into one of those goal areas, it's probably not something that's going to make it through the budget process. Our goal areas this year, they're pretty consistent with where they've been, but we've done some refining. We know over the last 2 years that we've all been engaged in a lot of work around equity in the schools. We conducted our equity audit and we created some recommendations. We took those recommendations, we turned them into last year's plan, and we've been implementing them as we go along. This year, we're refining that even more because we realized that there were some things that we could do better, there were some new things that we needed to do, but overall, what we were doing is working to make our schools areas that create conditions that promote equity across the board. It's not an individual thing that you do one day, it's something that has to be created, and those conditions need to exist consistently across all areas in the schools. Rigorous and consistent curriculum is always important. That's what our business is. We're in the business of education. So our rigorous and consistent curriculum includes opportunities to look at our curriculum, to make curriculum choices for some of our content areas, to take a look at existing curriculums and make sure they're representative, to make sure that we're offering access and opportunity for all of our students to all levels of rigor so that we're not streamlining students into either one level of course or another. Innovative practices are really looking at best practice within schools. Project-based learning is something that you've all heard me speak about before many times, but we consider that to be any type of relevant and authentic learning experience for students. Schools should be important because it should be meaningful when kids are in school, and so the goal of innovative practices is to make sure that we're raising the level of engagement for students, and that we're making school a relevant and authentic place. And then finally, operations and management practices. Really this year, we're looking at 2 specific areas under that. We continue our work on hiring practices. We actually have made some strides this year. Aaron Brown is our director of HR, and Andre Morgan, working together, we've done a lot of work around broadening our reach for candidates to make sure that we're attracting a wider pool. We've done work around retention to make sure that we're retaining staff within the district. So that work will continue. We've done training with the staff on hiring practices, looking at bias, looking at a lot of different ways that we can improve our hiring practices. And then the second area, which is new for us to formally include in our district improvement plan, is the area of sustainability. So we've done a lot in Beverly. We all know that Beverly has had a great effort towards what are we going to do around sustainability. We have 2 electric buses in our fleet. We have solar canopies being installed on our campus. But this year we included in our budget as well to take a closer look at recycling, at composting, at some of the internal operations in our buildings. What can we do within our buildings to improve some of our efficiencies in the area of sustainability? So those are the big picture goal areas. We believe we've created a budget that represent those goals and that will help us move those goals forward. So we took those goal areas. These are individual initiatives that we have in place that we'll be looking at. First is fostering a positive school community, create a school community that respects diverse people and talents. And then in particular, our focus for 22-23 is to elevate student voice. We believe that we have, if you've been to any of our forums, if you've listened to any of our amazing students speak, we have an amazing pool of fresh perspectives and ideas in our student body. And so elevating student voice is really important to us as we go into this school year. Cultivating belonging and engaging a divergent group of stakeholders. We want to make sure that we're hearing and listening to a large, broad group of stakeholders across the community. Ensuring a whole child approach to success, assessing the strengths and needs of each student through an MTSS, which means multi-tiered systems of support. Model of systemic support that connects each student with a tailored set of school and community-based supports and resources. This primarily will be focusing on an initiative that we are, a partnership actually, that we are entering into with City Connects. City Connects is an outside consulting firm that they're gonna come and work with us. There's items in the appropriated budget that support the work that will be taking place under City Connects, and there are items that some of the funding that we'll be using outside of the appropriated budget to also support that. We're looking at advanced coursework that has a particular passion of mine, making sure that all students have the opportunity to enroll and succeed in advanced coursework. If you've looked at our equity audit, that was one of our findings that we knew that we needed to address, and the recommendations have been to kind of really focus and do that. We're doing that through dual enrollment programs with North Shore Community College, with some of the local colleges, and even with some of the AP classes that we're offering within the building. We're looking specifically at outcomes after graduation. So some of the budgetary items that are being suggested are about creating those pathways for high school students and making sure that we identify for them in freshman year what's a pathway that you might want to try to be on that will include advanced coursework, so that it's not by happenstance that you end up in advanced coursework, but it's by intentionality that you do. The climate action planning, again, identifying targets within the school operations that we can reduce emissions with a goal of 0 carbon targets, trying and looking at what are we doing and how can we do it better. And then finally, the hiring and retention practices that I spoke about earlier. Councilor Rand mentioned this earlier. There are factors that impact the creation of the FY23 budget, and in particular, the first and foremost and probably one that impacts the budget the most is our contractual obligations. Taking a look, we are very fortunate this year. The negotiating subcommittee of the school committee and the school committee in general has worked diligently over the last 18 months. We have signed agreements for all 6 of our unions, so we know what those contractual obligations are, which is probably one of the first times when we're doing this budget that we actually knew what we were looking at and where we were going. We look at those, and so those are figured in, and those are real numbers. We know what they are. Enrollment and staffing is part of the process. We take a look, what are our enrollment changes? So enrollment in Beverly specifically is pretty steady. We looked specifically at the numbers in the course of the 21 into 22 school year and now into FY23, we are relatively stable, maybe 18 students less from October 1 to October 1 in a district of 4,700 students. That's a negligible, really, number. What is different, though, is sometimes you have a cohort, so if we had more students in the middle school that moved up to the high school, that impacts the staffing changes as we go. So taking a look at that, and also taking a look at enrollment, making sure we have really worked hard to develop pathways and options for students, and sometimes that means that we need to look at culinary, or we need to look at our business staff and make sure that we can offer those electives and offer those opportunities to more students rather than having students try to sign up for them and not being able to get in them. So some of our enrollment changes are due to that. Department funding requests, those are just pretty much year to year. What do we need to do to run the schools? What are the materials and supplies? Given the inflation that we're all facing, that's going to be a questionable one to keep our eye on. And then this was a really important recovery and renewal from the impact of the pandemic. So really, we came back this year. I think we all thought it might be a little easier than it actually turned out to be. But what do we need to do in the schools? How do we station ourselves so that we have what we need to support families who have had either trauma, who are suffering from the economic strains that the pandemic caused, who have social and emotional concerns, and really mental health concerns. So we needed to incorporate those factors as we were creating the budget. And then finally, and it's a very unique challenge and opportunity all at the same time, multiple sources of funding that are available to us. Clearly, we have the appropriated budget, which we always know is sort of the backbone of how we run the schools. But this year in particular, there are grants and funding opportunities that are available to us. We also had unique challenges over the last 2 years. We always have revolving accounts. We've always managed, and we always have offsets in revolving accounts. But our revolving accounts in particular were impacted, and adjustments were needed to be made, whether or not it was because we, in the 21-22 school year, did not charge a transportation fee. We did not rent our building. So revenue shifts and revenue changes may have impacted that a little. But we feel like we're right back where we were. Our revenue accounts are stable, and they're the offsets that we have in our budget are able to be met by them, so that was good. So I'm going to talk through each one of those categories for you so you have a better understanding of what they were. Our contractual obligations for FY23, our COLA for our teacher unions and other unions at 2.25. That number, that would mean that we have $1,606,025 is the contractual obligation just for the COLA. We have steps, which in education, at teachers step each year based upon experience. Our steps were 648, 221. Lanes are when they move over due to acquiring additional education. So the lanes are in the collective bargaining agreement that if you attain a certain number of credits, you move over a lane. And that's 265, 530. And then we have our healthcare increase, which we estimated at 3% at $200,000. So those are just contractual obligations for all the employees that we already have in our school system that are going to need to come back to work in September. The second thing that I mentioned that we look at is staffing changes, and I know I've spoken to several of you, and I appreciate you reaching out and asking questions and coming to me and having these discussions. Staffing is something that we're keeping our eye very closely on, but there are different ways to look at it. So we have opportunities at the elementary level, often, particularly in 3 schools, where we roll classes. So you might have 3 sections of 3rd grade and 4 sections of 4th grade. The next year you need 3 sections of 3rd grade, but 4 sections of 1st grade. So there's a lot of movement, and we do outline each one, whether it's a decrease or an increase. And we've also shown you in the budget book whether or not we are ESSER funding that position. And the positions that are ESSER funded, let me be clear, and the leadership will, I hope, all nod their head. If someone has a position that is on ESSER, they understand that that position is only as long as the life of ESSER, or only for, and particularly a 1 year. So we've made a 1-year commitment to the positions that we fund on ESSER. It's going to be a big challenge, not just for the schools, probably at the municipal level as well, for districts across the country, across the Commonwealth. It's to have built-up systems on the backs of funding that may go away. And so we are being really careful in Beverly that we're not doing that. We are very careful to, the school committee in particular we have a matrix we follow. We meet monthly with the Finance and Facilities Committee. We outline who's charged to what. We don't add new positions to anything without running it past the school committee. And so we're keeping very close track. There will be some positions that are on ESSER right now that we might, over the course of the year, identify and say, wow, that had a great impact. We need to think about how can we make that fit into the appropriated budget. And that goes back to my original comment that we're all constantly looking at restructuring opportunities. So how would that work? What would we need? What other funding sources are available? I kind of joke that there are like 4 piles of funding that are available, and as we're talking about what we need to do that aligns with our goals, we're trying to identify which pool of money we're going to be able to use. There are allowable expenses for some grants, so there are only some things that qualify to be used for some grants. And so we've been doing that throughout the year and working really hard to do that. So the effective FTE change at elementary is 4 positions. That includes the 5 City Connects positions. I've alluded to that a couple of times. Let me just give you a quick information about what City Connects is. Currently, we have school adjustment counselors in all of our buildings. And if a child or a family are in crisis, those school adjustment counselors are like school adjustment counselor to the rescue, right? They run out, they meet with families, they connect them with community resources, they do whatever they can to help the family when it's in crisis. But that's a very reactive mode of providing services to families. And in Beverly, over the course of the last 18 months, the school committee and the leadership and I have been in conversation. What is it that we need to do? How can we utilize the resources that we have to meet the needs of the families that we serve? And how can we do it? First, we made the conscious decision to first assess what those needs would be coming out of the pandemic, because none of us knew. If we had just gone out and hired a bunch of extra school adjustment counselors and discharged them into the buildings, we would remain in this reactive mode of providing services to families. But instead, we wanted to create a proactive response, which would be building that multi-tiered system of support. And so we researched a number of programs. We made the final decision to partner with Boston College and the program that they have called City Connects. That requires that we have a social worker. The City Connects counselor is a licensed social worker at each building, and that person is, in effect, meeting with teachers, meeting with families, and sort of determining the level of need of all of the students, not just those students that are in crisis, so that we're prepared and that we can maybe do some preventative work rather than wait for a family or a student to have a crisis. So that's the goal of it. We will be putting 5 City Connects counselors, 1 in each elementary school, because the idea is if you provide the services young, if you can reach the families, and if you can impact families when students are still in elementary school, that impact will remain with them throughout their high school career, and high school graduation and outcomes for students afterwards are the data shows they're much improved. We are also, so that's at elementary, and the rest are just flips and flops of grade levels based on enrollment. The middle school, same thing, although we're adding 2 City Connects. We have a very large middle school, as I'm sure you all know. We have thought really long and hard about how we could make up for the sort of gaps for our students that are in grades 5, 6, 7, and 8. Those students that are in 5, 6, and 7 were in 4th grade the last time they had a normal year of school for some of them. And so for us, this year was really about assessing and taking a look at what was going on. And the middle school team, the middle school staff has worked really hard. We believe that, by putting the 2 counselors, the 2 social workers there, will have a really strong impact on the middle school and be really helpful in terms of supporting kids prior to it becoming at that crisis level. We're not eliminating any school adjustment counselors. They are all still there, and they are all still going to be doing their regular job because that is a necessary service that the schools provide. But the City Connects will offer us that second layer of service. So we're really excited about that. In addition, we have we think we are having a new schedule, right? A new schedule in the middle school, right? So we have, since the building opened, we have been experimenting with schedule after schedule after schedule. What is the right one, particularly for grades 7 and 8. Grades 5 and 6 are on 2-person teams, and it doesn't really impact them as much. But in grades 7 and 8, we've had we've experimented with long blocks. We've experimented with a 45-minute block. But we know that what's really important is to establish relationships. And so how do we make sure that teachers have enough time with students so that they can establish those relationships? So we have a new schedule coming out. The new schedule did require us to think differently about our global applications, and so thus we've added a couple of teachers to kind of make that schedule run a little better. Again, you'll see a lot of those positions are ESSER funded. We're going into the first year. We're not going to commit to anything until we know if it works. So this is our year of taking a look at what we have to do and how we're going to work it. We did increase curriculum support at the middle school. Those are 2 positions, one for humanities and one for math and science, and those people will work directly with our directors of curriculum up at the high school to make sure that we have some plans for transition from 7th and 8th grade into high school, 5th and 6th grade to 7th and 8th, 4th grade to 5th, so hopefully that will be it's a welcome need at that school. Again, the effective FTE change at the middle school is 3.4 positions. At the high school, this is really where we had the greatest number of increase. And again, I talked to you earlier about the pathways that we're really working to try to create. Pathways meaning how can we make sure that we're having conversations with students when they're coming in as freshmen, looking at the courses that they might select, giving them a really great opportunity to explore in depth an area that they have a passion for. So, for example, if their passion is going to be business, there's a very well-established pathway. Make sure they're taking all of the core requirements so that they can take some of those electives that we have available. When they get up to that point. A pathway for culinary. We do not have a vocational culinary program in our high school, but we have a strong interest in culinary and a lot of students that want to do that. So we added a culinary teacher. We have some enrollment around special education, and again, a guidance counselor for freshmen to be able to implement some of that pathway work. So we recognize the need to have someone at that freshman year that's specific to freshmen. So those are the effective FTE changes. There are 10 positions. And again, we have various funding sources. We have the school choice revolving that we will be adding to the offset. Typically, the offset there is for English and science. So we added those 2 positions, and that offset will fall into the revolving, not into the appropriated. And we have special education grants, and so those special education costs will be absorbed through the special education funding. And then we have those 2 additional ones that are for ESSER. So that's how we plan to fund them as we work to kind of make these changes at the high school. There are some district-wide changes. we looked to add 2 subs. Those subs are really for our elementary special education meetings. Right now, if you have a special education meeting in a building and your classroom teacher needs to attend, we pull a para from another classroom to cover that classroom so the teacher can go to the meeting. We felt like if we could just find 2 positions that would travel around the district when the meetings were scheduled, that would eliminate the need to pull paras out of providing services that they're there for, needing for other students. We needed to increase our elementary strings because our strings program is so strong at the middle school, and our middle school strings teacher just needs to be there full time. So we added a 0.7 elementary strings that will be covering grades 3 and 4 at the elementary level. And we are increasing an elementary library resource by a 1.0 position. We're working on designing what exactly that will mean, but that person is to travel among the 5 elementary schools as a licensed librarian to kind of help strengthen the library programs that we have in place. Our library programs are really well resourced by parents in our district. We don't want to take that away from them, but we're offering an opportunity to provide some additional resources and supports for them in that area. And then finally, we have requests for non-staff. These are just costs, and they're part of what we have to absorb and fit in. And again, we look at that budget and we don't want to set ourselves up to not have the appropriated budget reflect the significant increases that we might need to have. So in particular, special ed transportation and homeless transportation, the $370,000 increase that we have, it is here, it is part of a function, I think, of the pandemic, and the contractual providers for transportation have raised their rates significantly. I don't believe that we have that many more students that are traveling, but I think that the costs of transporting them. We do have more homeless families. We have McKinney-Vento. That means that if a family is in Beverly and they find themselves homeless, if the shelter that they're put in, or if they find somewhere to double up is in Lynn or Swampscott or Boston or Lawrence or North Andover, then we are obligated to transport them back to the Beverly schools. And so that is really a significant increase for us in cost. For that. We are absorbing the leases, as we had said we would do all along, for the 2 electric buses, and so that money needed to be built in. The $20,000 for rubbish and $20,000 for sustainability are also sustainability efforts. So again, I go back to Mrs. Bisnick, school committee woman Bisnick asked me at a meeting, what's your plan? And I said, my plan is to make a plan. So that money is so that we can make a plan. I don't pretend to stand here and say we have this fabulous plan ready and we're going to start tomorrow, but we know that it's a really important thing that we need to do. Our students need and want to be involved in this. Our teachers need and want to be involved in this. So to make sure that there was some funding available in the budget that would support those efforts. We're working with the city, fingers crossed, on a upgrade of Munis that will allow us to provide self-service portal to our 920 employees who now are still receiving paper pay stubs and are unable to really access through technology their cafeteria plan, their health insurance, to look at how many days they've used for vacation, all of those things. And so we've set aside some money to make sure that we can implement the upgrade to Munis so that our employees are able to kind of do what they can do. And then finally, and this is, it looks like just a little line, but this is actually a really important piece, our technology. We're increasing our technology budget line by $100,000, and that is really only about 20% of where we need to be when the ESSER money goes away. And I'll explain that. Technology, devices, upgrades, wiring, those are all allowable expenses on ESSER. And so we are by far taking advantage of that and utilizing ESSER funding for those things. But what we don't want to do is ignore the fact that when the ESSER funding goes away, we need to be able to sustain what we've built. So that's the beginning steps in getting to where we need to be in FY25 for our technology line. You'll see over the next 2 or 3 years that we will continue to come forward, increasing that line so that we have what we need to do for our increase in technology. So that brings us to our appropriated budget, where our proposed city contribution is an increase of I think it's 2 point something million, from 54,785 to 56,201. However, as noted earlier, and I'm going to give you a few slides now, they're actually repeats from when we had our joint council meeting, so I will go through them quickly, but please stop me if you need me to. Our Chapter 70 increase was substantial, $2.5 million. And I'll have a conversation with you about why and how Beverly qualified for more Chapter 70 money. So, but this is our proposed final budget appropriation is $69,359,898. And that's what the school committee had voted forward. So here's some information about Chapter 70 and the Student Opportunity Act. First of all, I think we need to celebrate in Massachusetts that our Chapter 70 funding is a finance system that's driven by student need. I think both Council President Flowers and Councilor Rand kind of acknowledged that the reason for Chapter 70 funding comes from the student need and the students that you're serving in your district. And again, the other part of that formula is factoring in a community's ability to pay. So specifically, now, Chapter 70 funding quantifies what annual targets should be for the cost of educating students, and it identifies how those costs should be divided between state and local taxes. And so while we have not reached all of the targets, this Senate proposal, the Chapter 70 budget that's in the Senate right now, brings us closer to that. How are the increases distributed? Factors that impacted the increase were on the foundation budget side, enrollment, and particularly low-income students, the number of low-income students that are enrolled in your district, inflation and a wage adjustment factor. On the local contribution side, property value, income, and municipal revenue growth factor. But really in Beverly and across the board, the two largest factors were enrollment and inflation. And so, just so you know, across the Commonwealth, there was a wide range of increases. The gateway cities, which is Fall River, but also Lynn, Malden, Revere, they received very large increases. Fall River received a $1,920 per pupil increase, so think about that. While some districts received just a minimum increase of $30, and that's the guaranteed through the Student Opportunity Act lowest amount that you can receive as a district. So what does that mean in Beverly? In Beverly, our Chapter 70 funding for FY23, first of all, it's based on October 1 enrollment, so that's really important to understand. All of the funding formulas that are created by DESE really start on the October 1 deadline, and as well, this October 1 enrollment of students for whom Beverly is fiscally responsible, which is not really the number of students that sit in the seats, but the number of students for whom Beverly is fiscally responsible. And so while statewide enrollments have dropped, in Beverly, we've had stable enrollment, and we had a slight decrease in FY23 of 18 students. I mentioned that earlier. And the biggest shift for Beverly in enrollment was the number of students that were identified as low income. While our enrollment is steady, the number of students that qualified as economically disadvantaged increased dramatically. And I'll talk about that a little bit more too. And in general, they set inflation at 4.5, which is the highest rate that it's ever been set at. So when I say inflation, they gave us some credit for inflation, but let's be real. I think I read 8.9% is the inflation rate right now. In the fourth quarter, it was 7.3. So while it's there, it hasn't totally met its mark for inflation. And that brings us to the Student Opportunity Act. So the Student Opportunity Act, I always want to clarify, it's a piece of legislation. It's not a pool of money. There's not a fund called Student Opportunity Money. There's not money that sits out there based on that. It's a piece of legislation that determines how the formula is done and tells cities and towns what they're going to get. We're in the second year of a 6-year phase-in. That, remember, I said every district is guaranteed $30 per pupil. In FY22, Beverly received $30 per pupil. We did not receive anything more. Our formulas were set up based upon that. That was what we got. But in FY, and that was, we along with 246 districts received the minimum amount. The 135 were districts that received that. This year, Beverly will receive, thank you, Jean, $559 per pupil in incremental increase. So we're talking about this $2.5 million increase that we got for Chapter 70. One of the reasons that we're getting that has to do with all of the elements of SOA. They look at low income, they look at special education, they look at English learners, benefits and fixed charges, and guidance and psychological services. So the major factor for the increase in funding in Beverly is the number of low-income students. It impacts it in 3 ways. The Act reinstates the definition of low income to 185%. That was what it was in 2017. And now, from 2017 to 2021, it was 135. Now it's back up to 185. So there's another increase. And the number of students that were identified as low income in Beverly rose by 250. We had 1,422. It increased to 1,672. So, sorry. And then finally, the percentage went from 30 to 36%. So that's an incremental increase of 262. I'm going to let you read this one. That way I can get my breath.
Please take a moment and clear your.
But again, these are all just other factors that. Oh, that's good. So again, the special education rates, our after dark program, and the enrollment weighted for GIC. Thank you. So again, Student Opportunity Act is a piece of legislation that's designed to narrow the opportunity gaps. And it's really targeted at student achievement and post-secondary outcomes for student groups. I'm on the recovery here. So that's Student Opportunity Act, that's Chapter 70 funding. That was a repeat for a lot of you who were at the Joint Council. But again, those are the reasons that we in Beverly received a $2.5 million increase. And so when we built this budget, aimed to take that $2.5 million and make sure that we were directing it at the needs that were identified and the reason that we got more. I mentioned also that we got additional funding sources in grants. In Beverly, we received 3 ESSER grants. ESSER 1 was for funding during the FY21 and FY22 school year. We received $555,939. That money is expended, and on June 30th, it will be closed. We will have no more. We utilize that in a number of different ways for salaries, but that was really one that was important during the 2021 school year when we were in hybrid, and the 21-22 school year. We've also received 2 ESSER grants, one for $2,119,947. That funding is ESSER 2, and that's available for us to use during FY22, FY23. And then finally, we received ESSER 3, which is $4,741,978, and that funding is available FY22 through FY24. These funds are, we have great requirements from the state and from DESE around reporting. If you are interested in learning more about our implementation plan and how we decided to utilize that funding, if you look at our website for that logo, it's on the finance page. It has our entire use of funds page, so anyone that's interested in doing that, it can. In addition, every single time FNF meets, and probably 2 or 3 of our school committee meetings throughout the year, I give a report on our use of funds, how we're using them, how we're planning to utilize them. This year in particular, we talked about what did we use ESSER 1 for, how did we transfer, did we keep some of the positions that we originally paid on ESSER 1 and move them into appropriated, and if we did, why did we make that decision? So we're watching that very closely as a committee and as a district. So those ESSER funds are there. And we also have revolving accounts, and I put this up particularly because Mr. Perry and I had a conversation about this. We have total offsets in our budget for $4,301,413. Those are not new expenses. We have always had offsets in our budget that are utilized through revolving. The revolving accounts are special education circuit breaker, which is money that we get reimbursed and we utilize for special education costs. They are the transportation, for the fees from transportation go into a revolving fund. We offset driver salaries with some of those. We have building rental revolving account. When we rent out our buildings, the revenue comes in. We utilize that to pay custodian salaries who are working during those hours when the buildings are being rented out. Those are the types of things. Our athletic revolving account pays coaches' salaries. So if the money is in a revolving account, we use it only to pay for items in that same category. But we do have that, that's been there all along, that's not a new expense. So that brings us to the appropriated budget, the proposed city contribution of $56,201,457. The Chapter 70 money that's identified at $13,158,441 for a proposed final budget appropriation of $69,359,898. And that's what I have for you. Now I have my voice back and I can be done. Like that's weird. So I take any questions that anybody has. I'm happy to go back and clarify or correct or give you any answers.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent Trocek. Members of Finance and Property, Councilor St. Hilaire.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Chirocek. And I just want to start by saying, I've always found this to be a very professional approach that you've taken in your team. And I think we're getting a lot more information than when I previously served on the council, so I appreciate that. And, I'm very confident. I appreciate you sharing the comments about your process. Mm-hmm. I have all the confidence in the world that you've gone through a very formal and thoughtful process. And I would be remiss to say, like some of my colleagues, like with 3 kids in the public schools, they've had a fantastic year. Aside from Mr. DeLeon's Spanish class, I think everything is going swimmingly. So just want to thank everyone in the room for everything you've done over the last couple of years and for our kids. With that said, when I look at the budget, a 6.1% increase on essentially flat enrollment, I understand some of the background here related to Chapter 70 and why that is what it is. I guess my only question, I don't really have a lot of sort of nitpicking questions about why this position or that position, but I guess just thinking about the increase in spending, $69 million, how do you think about what does success look like for our schools? How do we justify, what are we measuring at the end of the year to say, we moved the needle, this was what we needed to do? I see things like, a culinary teacher and things like that, which, again, I have no doubt there's a need for that, but, is it MCAS? Is it cost per pupil? What are the things that when you look at our district, you say, yeah, we're getting better, we're improving, these are the metrics that
Yeah, that's a great
indicate
question. So if you look, we create a district improvement plan and school improvement plans at every building. And each one of those incorporate our goals. And each goal has a set of action plans that are aligned to it. So if we, for example, were to talk about, I pick hiring just because we were talking about it today. So we had a goal for hiring for this year, and we said we were going to do the following things. We were going to expand our broad reach out to the community to find candidates that weren't typically applying in Beverly. We said that we were going to provide mentoring and supports for our current staff to make sure that we were able to retain the people that we had here, diverse, in particular diverse educators. We said that we were going to train our administrators to make sure that they had understood bias in the hiring process, and we said that we were going to revisit our school spring ads, the ads that we placed, to make sure that they were free of bias and that they had a better pull for the community. We said that we were going to do all those things. So the metric is, did we do them? That's the question. And so when we present to the school committee our district improvement plan, and actually I gave you all a preview of it at the joint city council, that's exactly what we did. And so we make sure those action plans really drive, because the goals are really important. MCAS is important, but it's not going to tell you whether the culinary teacher's doing a very good job. Right. So we try to take a look at what are the realistic metrics that we need to set. We have action plans for each one of our goals. We had an action plan for every one of them, and we reviewed them and looked, did we do this, did we do this, did we do this? We have mid-cycle, we call them early indicators of success. And so we identify 2 early indicators on each action plan to say, are we on track? Have we forgot about this goal? Have we neglected to do what we need to do? And so I would say those are the metrics that, as the superintendent, I'm really looking at. Our district improvement plan drives our school improvement plans, so you will see a succession. The district has the wide overarching. Each school may have an individual take on what that would look like, so whether it's creating conditions for equity, one school may have one initiative that they're going to use that they believe it, and another may have a slightly different one, but it has the same end goal to make sure that we're creating those conditions. So I would say those are the metrics that I use and that I find, and I do report those out to the school committee. They drive my own individual goals as superintendent, they drive the leadership team's goals, and in the end, they drive the educator goals. So everybody is working off the same idea of where we want to be and what outcomes do we expect for ourselves and for students.
Okay, thank you. And, I guess just to follow up, again, I'm very supportive of the schools. We're facing lots of pressures on all kinds of issues. We talked about roads and sidewalks, and, we hear a lot about more money for that. We've talked a lot about the need for expanded youth services and parks and places for kids to play basketball. We've talked about diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives coming out of the race equity audit. We've talked about communication, IT, and for me, I just want to know that if we approve this and we're going to spend, increase 6.1%, I just want to know that it's tied to a plan that's going to improve our schools, and I want to be able to say that.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. President Flowers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Dr. Trocheck, for the presentation. I, like Councilor St. Hilaire, I also have a child in the public school system and really appreciate the work that all of your educators do. And when you were talking about the last time that students had a normal school year, it made me stop and think about that. And his was second grade, which is pretty striking, considering that he's now in the middle school as a fifth grader. There's a lot that happens in those years, as you all well know. So I have a question. I want to make sure that my math is correct. Maybe you can help me. Because I think, like Ms. Taylor in her graduation speech, I was better at ELA than the quadratic equation. I hope I'm not misquoting you, Ms. Taylor. But it looks to me like when I total up the contractual obligations for FY23, it comes to about 2.12 million. And it looks to me like when I look at the change in the city contribution from FY22 to FY23, that's about 1.42 million. If those numbers, if I'm doing my math correctly, it looks to me like it does bear out some of Councilor Rand's earlier questioning about the significant increase of contractual obligations and that the city's increased contribution doesn't even quite cover those. Is that fair to say?
So yes and no, I'm going to say, because I think that, again, when as I mentioned earlier, over the last 2 years, our budget, we have been, kind of required to adjust and change and pivot based upon either revenues that are coming in or services that aren't delivered or some of those things. So I believe that I also alluded in the beginning to restructuring opportunities. And so we have made restructuring opportunities where we can. Sometimes it means adding a new position, whether it's the Director of Opportunity Access and Equity or an additional assistant principal, but there's also other restructuring opportunities that we take that may be something that this is no longer the direction that we're going, and we don't need to invest in that anymore. I also just will remind you, make no bones about it, we get a lot of ESSER money, and we have a lot of opportunity to utilize resources outside of the appropriated. So we're looking in the appropriated to make sure that we're meeting those levels serviced, doing what we need to do. I will say, and I said this to a couple people that I met earlier, please don't think that because we have the ESSER money, we're not going to come back and ask for more money. We need to make sure that we're funding the schools on the appropriated budget so that we don't have a cliff budget in FY25. That would not work for any of us. Our contractual obligations are anticipated to be even more next year. The increase is 2.2 3/4 next year, I think, rather than 2 1/4. So that's going to make that number rise significantly. But we were able to, through this, there are a number of allowable expenses that perhaps they're one-time expenses that were in the B&G budget, right? And so, like we said, that DISTech, we're not paying for DISTech right now. We're letting ESSER pay for DISTech. We might need that back in eventually if we need it, but utilizing the time right now that we have. And so we feel confident that we're asking for what we need. So thank you.
Please.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate your deeper explanation. I guess I was thinking along the lines of what you just shared, that when I did the two totals, I was reflecting on the way that the schools, the contractual obligation is such a bulk of what you have to meet each year, and appreciating that those contractual obligations alone, that increase alone has outpaced what the city's proposed increase would be, and so was appreciating what I view as the resourcefulness that you're talking about restructuring and being creative. If I may, I have a question that may actually be for Mr. Ailes, if that is okay. It may not be, but I've looked at this a bunch of times, and I keep trying to figure out what I'm missing. It looks to me like the number on the memo that we got and what's in our budget book is not exactly the same as what's on the FY23 proposed final budget appropriation.
I will defer to Mr. Ailes on that one.
Thank you.
We've had this conversation already, so.
I was going to say, and I feel like there's a reason that I'm just not remembering. I think maybe this has even been asked before, so Mr. Ailes, can you help me out?
You noticed something that was pointed out to us earlier today as well. Effectively, it boils down to a Scribner's error that we made in the finance department. The number that we intended to support the schools at, and the mayor was committed to, is the number that the school committee has voted. We will make adjustments internally to absorb. It's about a $15,000 discrepancy. So we'll make sure that the schools are whole when and if the budget gets approved as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Ailes. And I was not attempting to point out a Scribner's error on your, I really have been staring at this for a while and even asked Councillor Bowen if I was missing something. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Turchak.
Yeah, I just have one sort of very detailed question and then a broader question. In your presentation, so I think of ESSER money as adding to the ability to spend, or basically a revenue. And in a number of places, you list an ESSER, I'll just take a look at one, decrease one FTE at North Beverly, and you list next to it ESSER.
Means it was funded by ESSER in the previous budget.
Got it. So so this would be ESSER, say ESSER 1 to ESSER 2? So it dropped off from ESSER 1, for example?
Correct. So let's use the decrease at grade 3 teacher at North Beverly, right?
Yeah.
So we had an additional third grade teacher at North Beverly that we funded through ESSER 1, and we are not, and so there would have been, Amy, 4 sections this year of grade 3. There will only be 3 sections of grade 4 next year. Therefore, we are no longer funding it, so it's a decrease in FTEs. And so it was funded on ESSER 1. Some of them are funded, if it says, increase, the new ESSERs, we're going to be using ESSER 2 and 3. But if it says decrease, that means it was previously funded on ESSER 1, and we're no longer utilizing ESSER 1 funds for that.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, I guess my comments or questions relate to a couple of different things. One is, one of the most striking things about this year's proposed budget for the school and what it encompasses is the increase in FTEs, which is a very large number, 21, I think is the number. I don't doubt for a moment the need for those positions. What I do ask myself, as being on the subcommittee of finance or property, is how sustainable is this? My quick notes. If I do my math here, 8, 9, 10, like Counselor, or like President Flowers, quadratic equations, not so much.
We have Jean.
And I'm not, and right now I'm just doing basic math, right? So give me just a moment. 8. So about 11 of those positions appear to be ESSER positions, if I have my numbers roughly correct. And so I'm heartened by what I heard from our budget analyst, Mr. Perry, who said this, the way we run the finances in the city, this appears to be a sustainable budget. My question to you is it sustainable from a staffing point of view when that number of the additional FTEs are based on ESSER funding? Mm-hmm. We talk about not having an ESSER cliff, if you will, right? Right. So if you could just sort of address in general, I think Councilor St. Hilaire sort of referred to sort of the trend line, right?
Yeah, I can
What-
give you,
what
I
does that mean?
have a pretty concrete example. So the positions that are on ESSER are knowingly put on ESSER, and when they're advertised and when we hire, we say it's an ESSER-funded position, and the position, you know, is a one-year position. It says in the contract, a one-year position. So those folks know. The types of position, we think very carefully. So you will notice that our City Connects counselors are in the appropriated budget. They're in the appropriated budget because we're making a minimum 5-year commitment to making sure that we give the opportunity to make sure this initiative holds, that we resource it well, that we support it, and that we don't put something in and then before it has time to have an impact, take it away, or are forced to take it away. The two positions that are on ESSER, for example, are two middle school reading teachers. So we have two middle school reading teachers in the appropriated budget. We have two additional middle school reading teachers that are ESSER funded. We did that largely because of some of the gaps that we saw for students in grades 5 and 6, still requiring some more specific reading instruction, but we anticipate that need to go away. And so those positions, when the ESSER funding is no longer needed, will no longer exist. We'll go back to having two reading teachers at the middle school. We have some positions that we've identified that we want to move in, and so we're doing it a little more slowly. So we had a couple of director positions that were fully funded on ESSER in FY22. We've moved 50% of that funding into the appropriated budget this year. We do anticipate to have another Chapter 70 increase. I don't know what it will look like. I can't predict, but in anticipation of that, we intend to move the remaining part of those positions either into the appropriated budget or onto entitlement grants or other grants that have them as an allowable use. So, you know, we're very mindful of the positions that we are identifying, and we look at them as, okay, here's what we're going to do. There may be some positions that we put on ESSER this year that we say, oh my God, that had the most impact, more impact than we could imagine, and we're going to look at those restructuring opportunities or an increase, you know, as an FTE in FY24. But we are being very mindful. We're doing the same with our one-time expenses. I had a conversation today about technology. I mean, I know that I'm spending $400,000 on iPad and iPad renewals and all of that needs to get into the appropriated budget. We started by putting $100,000 in this year, but I'm not going to leave the ESSER money sitting out there and not use it. There's no reason to use appropriated money right now when I don't have to, as long as I keep my eye on the fact that I need to make sure that gets moved into the budget over the course of the next 2 years. So you will see, as we bring budgets forward, that number is going to increase so that we have our sustainability plan for making sure that we can do what we need to do in that area. So it's not just salaries, it's actually some other expenses, but then there are a lot of expenses that are just truly one-time expenses that we are looking at for ESSER funding. So, you know, replacing an HVAC system on the roof of one of the elementary schools, that's a one-time expense. Working with Mike Collins and the mayor, knowing that we can utilize funding for that. Those are the types of things, those are other types of things that ESSER funding can be used for.
Thank you. The rest of the council also, I'm sure, has questions and comments, so I'll stay with one other sort of reflection, I guess, which is we'll get to in the form of a question, which is the relationship between the additional need, say through City Connect, as a result of COVID or independently of COVID due to an increase in homelessness and students from families who are homeless. And I wonder if you could sort of connect the threads between, if you have any insight into the impact of COVID, whether or not it has, from your insights, something to do with increase in homelessness, sort of the economic ripple effect, and whether City Connect specifically is addressing impacts of COVID in the student population.
So, if I understood you correctly, I think one of the things that I would say, first of all, is yes, and yes, the impact of COVID for all of those things, right? I mean, this has been, and I haven't said this word in a long time, unprecedented. I used to say that the whole first year we were doing COVID. But in terms of the impact that it has on families, we made a commitment early on to say we don't know what that impact is going to be. And actually, I think the impact impact is still yet to come. I think that I don't believe we've hit the peak of what that impact is going to look like, and I don't think we've identified the shape that impact is going to have, because it's going to come in different shapes every year. As people progress through the years, so what looked like trauma might be residual mental health issues, might become residual homelessness issues. I mean, we don't really know the direction that's going to go. In terms of City Connects, what City Connects will bring us, and I would have welcomed this without the pandemic. I think it's the sense of urgency has increased because of the pandemic, but we need to address our students and their families and identify prior to a crisis. So, and then when we have that, right now we have 8 buildings if you include the preschool. So we have 8 different organizations that are independently out looking for community resources for families. What City Connects will bring to us is one place where school adjustment counselors can go and access those community resources, whether it's Big Brother, Big Sister, whether it's a Home for Little Wanderers, whether it's a mentoring program for, adolescent youth, whether it's an opportunity for after-school care or after-school programming. The purpose of City Connects is to kind of gather all that information. What does Beverly have available? Some part of City Connects will make us aware of a lack of resources that we have in the community and have us go out and look for different resources, right? Maybe we'll learn that we need longer hours at the library, or we need, a transportation, I don't know. I mean, it will at least kind of, I think, make us aware of the resources that we're missing. We know that there's a shortage of beds right now. So if you're having a mental health crisis, we're really struggling to try to find services for you. So maybe we'll broaden the number of resources we have around that, because everybody will be able to work together. In terms of whether they directly are working on just COVID, I think no. I would say City Connects has been around for 20 years. It's not brand new. It's not a new initiative. It's going to be new to Beverly. Salem, I think, has been partnering with City Connects for the last 4 years, I think. The city of Boston has been partnering with them. That's why they have some longitudinal data over 12 to 15 years. They're also in other places. So I think the COVID has exacerbated anybody that was vulnerable and created more vulnerabilities among other families that we may not have happened, whether they or that we may not have known about.
There's a lot to talk about there, but I'll defer to the rest of my colleagues who also, I'm sure, have questions. So, Councilor Feldman.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for this presentation. It was very thorough, and I really appreciate it. And I really like quadratic equations. That's
good. Mrs. Taylor will be calling you.
Anyone who's had one of my children in school knows that math is more fun for us. So when in looking at the differentials between the budgets, the 2 years, and the increase, it looks like about 65% of the increase is covered by Chapter 70 funds, because the city.
I would say that's about right.
Yeah,
and 2.5 million is Chapter 70 of the approximately 4 million, right?
Right. So that is, in terms of the city increase, that's, it's great that we're keeping that on the lower end in terms of what is being funded. But it's a 2-part question, and I believe I asked this at the joint meeting, but I can't remember the answer. Are there, in terms of Chapter 70 funding, are there strings attached to what you can spend that appropriation on? And if so, when you're talking about these future COLA increases and contractual obligations over the next years, how will that impact, if this is where the budget is at and we know there will be an increase? I'm just trying to get my head around if the Chapter 70 funding decreases, or if there are strings attached, or if any of that shifts, what that will look like for future planning.
So I'll do my best to answer that. I believe, to start with, that there are no strings attached. So unlike ESSER funding, which has allowable usage, which you have to identify as an allowable use, the Chapter 70 funding it comes into the district as part of the funding that's identified on the cherry sheets for the schools. So in terms of What was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
How can we be sure that there will be an increase or?
Oh, so, yes,
in the
so
check?
and again, I wish I had a more specific, it's my understanding that that minimum $30 per district, I think we would, if in fact there were changes so we have 200 less families that are economically disadvantaged next year, we would fall back to, but it would always be that minimum $30, because that's what the Student Opportunity Act calls for. So it would be a modest increase as opposed to a large increase that we got.
Right, so it
It won't fall, it shouldn't. Have there been times in history where it was cut? Yes, hoping we're not going there, but in terms of the expectation right now would be that at minimum you can rely upon a $30 per pupil increase, and then based upon the need and the student need in your district, it would be coordinated that way.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Counselor Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Building quickly off of the point that Councilor Feldman just made, I know that we are in the second year of a 6-year phase-in of the provisions of the Student Opportunity Act. Does that minimum $30 per pupil increase? Ideally, it will be more for Beverly.
Yeah, I'm not really sure, but I do know some things that do. So for a good example would be special education transportation, right? That's it's the funding formula. In past years, special education transportation was not reimbursed. Now it is, but it was rolled in as part of that, so we got 25% reimbursement. The next year we'll get 50%, the next year 75%. So I can't answer that right now, whether 30 would go up to 40, I don't know. But I believe that the Act says $30 per pupil is the minimum for a district. I also believe there was some legislation posed for $30, like the $30 minimum districts, that there was extra funding made available to them because they only got $30. So
Yeah.
I do believe that happened.
And would that extend until the 6th year of the phase-in and then?
I'm not
level
sure.
off?
I'm not sure. The $30, I think, stays for the 6 years. I'm not sure. I think that will be an annual decision, whether they would give more than $30, probably based upon how much was used, how much was left, available. The formula gets a little complicated even for me as we get really deep into how they do that.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? Counselor Rand.
Thank you. First, I would like to comment on the focus areas, and thank you for presenting them in such a, concise way, and I support all of your focus areas for 22-23 school year. And I also, just as a comment, wanted to say that I think it's really important that you included elevating student voices, and am of the opinion that that will actually help you to create conditions that promote equity. I've had the opportunity to speak with some of the amazing students at the high school especially, and they really seem to be calling for things like more of a focus on Black History Month and Pride Month, and know that they felt comfortable enough sharing that with me. So I'm guessing that elevating their voices will really support other goals. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
I also wanted to ask, in full disclosure, I'm an aide in a different school system. So like I've said before, it was like a whole shocking new world to me, and I feel like I come to this budget in a different light now. But I'm wondering if you're including anti-bias training for your paras.
So the training that we design is district-wide, not just teachers, paras, clerks, transportation, food service. So we have been providing that to all of them. We, in the beginning of the year, had a couple of days. Paras are included in those days. And we have programming. I'm sure we could do more, but I do know that all of the anti-bias training that we have been working on has been targeted to all of our employees, because I think, if there's kids ride buses and kids eat in the cafeteria, and they're in small groups with paras, and they're with teachers, and so it's not just, and again, I think that was part of the refinement of our category to creating conditions for equity, because I think it's more than just a one-time training for someone or a one-time conversation. We want to think about how do How do we make sure our teachers have the tools they need to have a discussion group after something that has happened in the nation, right? And so there's that, you need tools for that, you need training for that. It's not, you don't just do bias, you don't just do Black History Month 1 month in February, it's throughout the whole year. So we're trying to figure that out, and that was part of the refinement that we did of that one goal area, so.
That's great. And one last kind of comment / question. I'm glad that we have a commitment to transportation for students who are experiencing homelessness. And this is sort of more of a philosophical take on that $120,000. I know that's a requirement that we do that, and I'd love to have sort of thinking out of the box conversations, both with you and Mayor Cahill, about how we could maybe think of that money. When I see $120,000 and I think of how many families that might be supporting, I think about how much it might cost to just actually house those families. So, and I know that's not a decision that can be made by one individual, but I think Beverly is the kind of community that can sort of take a look at a number like that and the process, and even just lead the way for the state and communities around the country to say, for the price of transportation, we actually could pay rent. So just something that I want to put out there publicly and make a commitment to bringing this up again and speaking more about it with your brilliant mind at all things school. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Councilor Rotundo.
Thank you. I actually wasn't going to have a question, but I do have one question, which goes from my days of PTO days. And I'm looking at this one elementary library resource. And I remember this conversation years ago when the libraries in the elementary school became all parent volunteers. This position is going to support now those libraries that those PTO presidents for years have been asking for something. Is that this position sort of? I guess I'm really just reminiscing more back to
The intention isn't to replace the parent volunteers, it's to support the parent
That's what I mean,
volunteers.
is
Because
so
we
I-
find that libraries are a great place for our parents, and they love doing some of that work, but, there has been a lot of discussion, and again, we go back to this reimagining. So we had librarians that were part-time in our buildings, and then they became media specialists, and so then we had them teaching, in the technology labs that we had with the desktops, and they were teaching how to open the computer, and then that shifted to STEM teachers, right? So we lost that connection for someone with a library science background to kind of help oversee, we have Barb Fecto and we have Alex Wozniak, who are amazing and awesome librarians, and so we're looking to kind of just add to the team and be able to support the work. I'm going to be honest with this one too. We're planning to have a plan, right? We're not really sure what that is exactly going to look like, but we needed to resource it in the budget so that we could get someone to come in to help us make what is the right amount of support? Is it every day in a different building? Is it a couple of weeks in each building? And then, so we're going to work on that. But we needed to at least have the money in the budget to be able to get someone in so that we could do that work.
That's it. That's just, like I said, I was just going back to many years ago.
You were fondly remembering
I
your
remember
time
that
as
conversation
PTO
very well.
president.
So I
know
think that
you
was
were.
more or less, I was kind of looking back at this conversation. So that's all. Thank you.
Councilor Bowen.
Thank you. And I just want to add my thanks for the comprehensive presentation. It's really helpful to be able to see the goals, what was achieved within the budget last year, what the plans are, and how the budget request maps to that. So don't have many questions, mostly thanks to you and the leadership team and the school committee for having constructed the budget in that way and presented it in that way. So I just had one quick clarifying question and then a little bit broader question that might be a good place to close. But the clarification was just on how our school choice funding works, money that comes in and money that goes out. I was trying to figure out what sort of is factored into the school revenue side and what's factored into the city or school expense side.
So the school choice, we first of all, school choice is voted annually by the school committee, and they determine the number of seats and the number of people that will come in. Historically, we've worked really hard. We had been this way, where we had more kids going out and less kids coming in. We've done a really nice job of flipping that. We have a cap of 10 seats per grade level for K through 8 and 15 seats at the high school. Once you're awarded a school choice seat, you stay in Beverly. You have the right to stay through graduation. So needless to say, we have very few available seats right now. Funding comes through the Department of Ed. I think it's approximately 5420, but don't quote me on that we get in per student. There are some differentials based upon student needs. So if a student requires more extensive services and they're school choiced in, then the sending community is charged more money, and so more money comes in. Students that leave Beverly to go somewhere else are conversely choicing out, and the funding, goes out. And so the revenues come in, and they're in a revolving account that we have on the revolving budget list that we have. We utilize those offsets for salaries for teachers, primarily English and science teachers at the high school, and I think that was just a decision that was made a long time ago in terms of budgeting to make sure we knew where they were going and what we were doing. And that comes into the school budget. The city kind of receives the bill for the people that go out. School choice is typically to a sending district. There's sort of been a new phenomenon. We talked about this a little bit today. There's a online, virtual, state-run online schools that's also now considered under that school choice line, I believe. And so we get that 5420 bill for the students that choice out, but we get a $10,000 bill for students that have opted into that virtual. And so that's pretty much how it works. We have we don't have a waiting list, which was pretty good. I think people know there's not a lot of openings. I'm not really sure, but we are largely full in terms of the students that we take in, and it's as we said, it's a revenue source for us that we utilize for offsetting salaries.
Thank you. And then the slightly broader question is just, we talked in the joint meeting a few months ago about just sort of how teachers and staff are also doing after a couple of difficult school years, to say the least. So I'm just curious, with this budget request and the ESSER funds, what the summer looks like and the sort of recovery and preparation time, and what the plans are to support all of our staff as they look to a next year while students aren't in the building over the summer, what that plan looks
It
like.
would be really good to just give everybody a beach chair
Right.
and send them home and say,
That's
"Here's
not a line
and a good
in the
book.
request.
Here's a beach chair and a good book. There you go. Go off." So we have opportunities for teachers over the summer to do some curriculum work, which at one level sounds like you're going to make them work, but actually for some teachers it's a really good opportunity to kind of rewind, revisit, and kind of plan ahead so that they're feeling a little more grounded. I think there's been so much uncertainty for teachers. Spending a summer worrying about whether you're going back to masks, whether you're going back to hybrid, whether you're going, what is this going to look like? How are the kids going to be? That was really, I think, more taxing than we even gave it credit for. September and October were really, really difficult months. We kind of just got it going again, and then we had the surge, and then we got it going again, and then there was the threat of another surge. So it's been a year of a lot of uncertainty. I hope for our teachers as they're coming back, and for our administrators who are amazing, and I don't want to underscore the toll that it takes on administrators as they're running these buildings with the staff, that we can look to a more stable year. We talk all the time about, as we're going forward, the reset that we're going to be able to have, that we thought we were going to have last year might actually occur next year. And so, summer staffing our summer programming was very challenging. We have a lot of teachers who are opting not to work summers when they used to work summers. But Bethany's amazing and pulled that together, so we did have enough staffing for our summer school programs. So, really, we hope that being able to provide some certainty for the middle school teachers, knowing what that schedule is going to look like when they come back, and having one that they participated in and built, understanding that we're going to have some social workers in the building, so the onus isn't going to be on that classroom teacher to decide why, Sue Churchek's head is down under a hood, right? But that teacher's going to have someone they can go to, and we're going to have conversations about that. So I think that's going to be really helpful. It's going to help our school adjustment counselors, so they're not the only ones, we say sometimes, running around like chickens situations with their head cut off, because that's what it feels like some days, if you're just putting out fires, chasing around someone that's in crisis. So I think for us, what we hope is that really solid planning and a really comfortable feeling that at least we're going back to some more of a stable start to the school year will be really helpful.
Thank you. Yes, Councilor Crowley.
Yeah, so I just wanted to convey my thanks for everybody and the things that you guys have done over these last couple of years, just specifically with everything that has gone on with COVID and everything. I know it's been very stressful. I have some friends that are teachers and administrators in the school systems, and it's been a difficult couple of years, and now trying to do the respin. So hats off, and you know, it's great. And my math, just to throw my math in there, you know, mine's more like, you know, studs are 16 inches on center, way back to Patton vocational days. So, you know, so that's just going it back. But thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and as everyone has said, certainly appreciate the presentation. I also appreciate you taking the time to talk with me through the school choice revenue, the ESSER plan, and some other components of this budget. I do have two aspects I'd like to ask questions about. First, with the special education circuit breaker, is it typical that the 75% funding that is currently projected throughout the state budget, is that the level that will hold? So we should anticipate, I believe it's roughly 2.6 million, and that probably won't change between now and when the state's budget is finalized.
So one of the unique things about circuit breakers, it comes a year later, right? So we
Okay.
know what we've put in and what we've requested and what we've gotten. I'm going to make sure Bethany keeps saying yes as I say these answers. And you know, the revolving account is actually the receipts from the previous year, and there's requirements around how we need to spend that we can't underspend, we can't overspend what we have for receipts. We have to make sure that we don't carry too much more over. But we did talk a little bit today. It's one of the recommendations for a stable school system is to make sure that you're carrying 100% funding for your circuit breaker from one year into the next. When we began looking at this 5 or 6 years ago, we were at 25%, and that came on the heels, I don't know, some of you might have been around when we had 14 move-ins in 1 year, and it kind of wiped it out, and that's why you have it, because otherwise we're standing here asking for more money from the city council, and we don't want to do that. And so the circuit breaker is there for that. And so yes, I think we're comfortable in terms of whether it's at 75. We always say range between 68 and, so we used to say 68 to 75%. I think now we're more 72 to 75%. I think we're pretty confident that that percentage of reimbursement is going to be available for us.
Okay. So that's,
unless somebody knows something that none of us know, right? Like,
yeah.
I say confident, and then I think back to 2.5 years ago when I wasn't confident about anything. So,
Okay, that's helpful context. The next question that I have with regards to the City Connects program, I certainly appreciate the efforts of the schools to think in a more proactive manner coming out of the pandemic and providing these student supports. I know that the 5 FTEs are roughly a quarter of what is being requested for additional FTEs, and I'm curious, it may be too early on in the implementation of the program, but have you, as Councilor St. Hilaire asked for the district, have you put a more narrowly tailored plan of what metrics of success you will be looking towards with implementing the City Connects program?
In our goal areas, that's one of our focus areas, and there is an action plan that is attached to that.
Okay.
We look at statistics like, so one of the things is to make sure, one metric that we're going to be looking at is by November 1st, that City Connects coordinator has met with every teacher and discussed the students that are in their class. By a certain date, they've had that opportunity to identify community resources and compile them. A lot of the first year really is just sort of building this virtual dashboard that houses all of that information. And so, it's as simple as making sure that we've uploaded all the students from Aspen into the program to making sure that the dashboard that holds those community resources being, well sourced, and that the school adjustment councils have access to it. So it's going to be this first year. As I said, we're making like a 5-year commitment here, and making sure that we do things in the order that we need to do. There's a lot of professional development that comes from Boston College. There's coaching that comes from Boston College. So there's a lot of supports that we have and individual metrics that we've set.
Okay, thank you, and I'm certainly excited to see that initiative take place here in Beverly.
Great. Dr. Kurochek, I just want to echo the comments of my colleagues about having both a clear and concise presentation, but also the depth and breadth of your responses to the questions that my colleagues and I have, and also to just a note of tremendous appreciation for how difficult it has been and how well the Beverly school system has responded in these last few years to the challenges that we've faced. So thank you very much.
Yes, well, thank you. We feel very well supported by the city, and we know that the city does value education here in Beverly. That is our resource, right? There are people, they're going to grow up and be our residents, and they're going to be, it's the best investment that we can make. So I do appreciate that from all of you. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilors, we can, the next thing we have on our agenda is the Airport Enterprise Fund. And we can, if you want, take a 5-minute break and come back to that. Does that sound like something people would like? I see a few shakes of the heads. I would accept a motion for Finance and Property to break, and I don't think I can do it can I do it in one motion?
Probably two.
Yeah, okay. Finance and Property to adjourn until 8:15. Is there a move?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Is there a motion for the full council for us to adjourn until 8:15?
Absolutely.
Second.
I hear a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned until 8:15.
Imagine.
For everyone, we will be, I direct your attention to page 148 in our budget binder, and welcome Gloria Bullion to the podium. Good evening.
Good evening, councilors.
I think everyone here has met you, but perhaps a few words might be in order about the work of the airport, especially for the newer councilors, before we jump into the enterprise fund.
Sure. So I am Gloria Bleon. I've been the airport manager for actually 4 years this coming month. So it's been exciting. And when I first came on board, the airport was not really operated in a way, I would say, like a business. And so a lot of change has happened over the past 4 years. We went from number 9 in the state to the number 2 airport in Massachusetts as far as general aviation airports. Within our first year, we were recognized as the standout airport in the region, and held a conference, and we were asked to speak on what we did that was so differently with our stakeholders, with our community, and with our businesses. And so previously, there really had not been a lot of emphasis on community outreach, particularly through a website. And because we reside in 3 communities, but we have a catchment area of 40 communities, and that's growing. There really was not an effective way to do outreach. And so I brought on an advertising firm, overhauled and created a new website, excuse me, where we were able to communicate a lot more on what our current projects were, what the noise program was that we were implementing, as well as some of our future plans, which at the time had been a master plan, and then a runway rehabilitation plan that ended up being a runway safety area expansion. And so from that work, we have grown substantially with our businesses, and we have done a fantastic, in my opinion, fantastic job working with our community and stakeholders. Currently, we hold once monthly noise committee meetings with the commission, and as far as capital improvement plans, we are working within the next 2 years of a runway extension for one of our primary runways, which was in the plans for a demolition, which have actually resulted in losses for all our businesses and our community. And so it's a project that will take a lot of coordination time, and we're looking at grants of around $17 million over the next 2 years for the first phase of the project. Within the next 5 years, we're looking at over $20 million or so in funding for the runway improvements in the safety areas, and then the resulting improvements in the entire airfield geometry. This will result in LED lighting for all the runways, excuse me, so increased in efficiency. We have increased efficiencies in our taxiway layouts and some of the design in which we can we're hoping that we'll actually reduce some of the noise that some of our neighborhoods are experiencing. So we are looking at ways to work with our communities, work with our stakeholders, and again, we operate more like a business as opposed to, I would say, a function of the municipality. And that is mostly where we prioritize amongst other airports within our region, and then at a national level as well, because we do essentially compete with other airports for funding levels. And actually, and so within the last 4 years, we have grown over 40% in our operations. And then this past year, in our biggest revenues, one of the biggest revenue streams, we grew almost 40%, and we're not at year end yet. So it's been a lot of growth as we implemented new business plans and new ways to capture an effective way to manage the airport revenues.
Thank you very much. Members of the subcommittee, Councilor St. Hilaire.
Yes, thank you, and glad to hear you're taking a much more of a business approach. I've always viewed the airport as a unique asset for the city, and think there's a lot of opportunity there. Just curious from a economic development point of view, I know there used to be a restaurant there, I know there's a couple little buildings there. Has there been any interest in further development around the airport?
Yes, actually, yeah, we do have some acreage available. I've been working with the city departments on an RFP development for an industrial park. We have various businesses that have been requesting that space over the years, and actually there is incredible demand for that space. Some of the projections for the leased area, because we don't sell off land, some of the projections for the leased area were incredible amounts of revenue that would more than sustain the airport in the future. It would actually be able to allow us to put more capital infrastructure and better developments with public-private partnerships.
One follow-up question. In the expansion of the runway, is that designed to allow larger planes to come in? Is that the idea?
So that project came about because we were at a rehabilitation project in which the current runway in 2018 was about to be, the width of it was going to be demolished to a runway category which would allow a lot of our leaseholds, such as our larger corporate leaseholds, to vacate their properties essentially because of the language in the lease, because they would no longer be able to use the runway. In the capital construction meeting that year, I showed the Mass DOT and the FAA of what was the actuality of the large aircraft that were already operating there, but they were taking less fuel loads in order to do longer haul missions. So we are actually an international airport. We have customs and borders at the airport when they have to clear flights. So that's something that people don't really realize, is that we are international. And so some of these flights would have to make shorter stops instead of doing the longer destinations that these aircraft are designed to go these longer ranges. And so we're not looking, when we look at growth for what we're projecting, it's actually 1.12 growth, like a annual growth aggregate. So it's not a massive amount of growth, even though we have experienced that in all categories. But as far as the larger fleet, the runway expansion was to meet the current values that we were already experiencing. It just had not been, the numbers had not been worked out essentially in some of the previous documents. And so then it was also projected with future values so that these aircraft that are existing, that are currently there, can utilize it without having to make stops at other airports. So it's based on current numbers and then a little bit on future numbers off of future projections.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I just have three questions. One, what's the metric you used when you said the airport went from number 9 to number 2?
So we use that in terms of operations. Previously, when we look at our operations compared to Bedford, so Bedford is one of the other regional airports in which they do not have commercial per se service, so they do not have airline service. So they're considered a general aviation airport just like us. I compared the value of us compared to all the other airports within the state. And so when we look at terms of operations, which are, it's a takeoff and a departure and a landing. And so when we looked at the actual amount of operations that were occurring at the time, we were ranked number 9 in the state. So then when we, we were able to increase that based on the business, I would say new business work that we did with the businesses, we became number 2, just behind Bedford. And that is a priority in the state system. That is a priority amongst where we rate in the funding system. Like I said, with airports nationally.
Okay, thank you. Also, you mentioned outreach and working with other communities regarding sound. I gather that means sound mitigation. Is that dealing with impact on nearby residential structures and trying to, say, have more sound-resistant windows and funding for that? Is that the kind of program you're talking about?
So not necessarily. So some of those funding levels are for sound insulation and mitigation are actually not within the airport's boundary. So when you look at the noise study that we conducted did not meet the threshold for that type of mitigation. So the Federal Aviation Administration has very strict guidelines on what the mitigation will be. So if they're doing sound insulation, new windows, or anything like that, it has to meet the threshold. The airport, when we did our noise study, we did not meet that threshold of noise over those residences. So, and actually our study is posted on our website if you want to take a look at it. But we did not meet that threshold in which the FAA will pay for funding for the noise mitigation. So the efforts that we have done are with our businesses. It has been phenomenal work with the businesses. So yes, we've had growth, and the residents have experienced this increase in noise. And so with the businesses, we've implemented measures in which we've had it has to be voluntary, but we do stress that measure as strongly as we can, because we are tied to grant assurances, which also ties us to what we can and cannot do with operations, essentially. So some of the measures are flying over different different neighborhoods for certain periods, trying to mitigate it as much as possible. Some of our businesses actually don't fly on holidays. They don't do certain operations after 9 p.m. So we have been doing a lot of measures that we can do because we don't have a schedule per se by airline operations.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, I know there has been some environmental remediation around PFAS. Is that site work closed up and that matter done, or is that still ongoing?
So that's ongoing. So we are, but as far as the airport, we have been meeting every requirement that we have been requested to conduct. So we are working with a firm. We have submitted all our samples. Additional work has been done. So we're actually ahead of schedule, and we're actually planning for the work in about a year from now. So we are meeting all the requirements that we have been asked to do.
And the funding from that comes out from what source? So
that is actually from our capital funds. That's not from our operations budget per se, but that is from our actual capital budget. So that has been coming from the airport's budget.
Okay, thank you. Councilor, President Flowers?
No, I'm all set. Thank you very much.
Councilors over here, any questions? Councilor Bone?
Thank you. I just had a clarifying question on the last line in the budget.
Page 152?
Yes, page 152, one of the kinds of transfers. And there isn't a request for the coming fiscal year, but there was a large amount for the past fiscal year, and so I was just curious what that line was all about.
I'm sorry, can you tell me what line that is?
Yeah, it's number 59740, the last line in the expenses on page 152.
Okay. So that was, for my understanding, and maybe Brian can explain, that was from some of the work with the PFAS that we took out of to cover some of the PFAS costs and some of our other costs that were associated with the environmental work.
Perhaps Mr. Ailes can clarify for us?
Yeah.
So that line, the development, Councilor Bowen's question, is primarily a transfer for PFAS remediation?
Yeah, council voted on it, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago.
Okay.
That's correct.
So that was the transfer from retained earnings to the capital fund to cover that.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And that's not, like I said, that's not normal because the PFAS work has been going on for the last, I would say, 2.5 years or so. So that's normally not something that we incur with that high of a cost.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Then, so I think just to follow-up, in terms of how the budget for this enterprise fund is constructed, it sounds like you're seeing growth in revenues, and so that's part of what allowed for, being over revenue projections in the last fiscal year, and so having that space to transfer some money into the capital fund.
Right, exactly.
And then, this is maybe also a question for Mr. Ailes, but the revenue projections for the coming year are sort of in line with what the actuals have been or are expected to be for this fiscal year, and based on all that growth. And I'm just curious, in the general fund, we're not able to do that, it seems, to show where we're expecting growth. But here, it seems to align with the plans and allows for then, being able to budget some expenditures for the coming fiscal year that weren't possible in the past.
And I'll just real quick, so as far as the Airport Enterprise Fund goes, the FAA looks at what they call the revenue use policy, and its rules about how you can expend the revenues. So they're extremely strict with airport funds because they're funded through user fees essentially. So any type of fund that is generated by aviation for aviation has to be expended at the airport. So we are not actually allowed to fund any other community use. So for example, we wouldn't be able to pay for a park or advertising for the community. We can do so in certain ways in relation to that, that would benefit the airport as a way, in the community, but they're very strict about guidelines as far as it has to be expended on the airport for capital and everything else, because we receive grants, and those grant assurance obligations require us to expend those funds in a manner that's very strict with the revenue use policy.
Mr. Ailes, did you want to supplement that?
I was just going to answer.
Go ahead.
Kind of a specific question there about how the revenues line up with past expenditures, if I understood the question correctly, Councilor Bowman.
So it's more a question, that answered a piece of the question of sort of how you're looking at building the budget for the next year. But I was mostly curious how this differs from how you build the general fund budget, where the revenue estimates can't be, you've said the state won't approve our final tax rate if we have projected revenues based on recent actuals, but not based on.
If they exceed the actuals, that's where we really get into trouble. And on the general fund side, a lot of the revenues that we rely on are ones that can fluctuate over time, and so they're much more cautious in approving municipalities kind of being overly aggressive, whereas with the airport, there's very strict formulas that go into these specific revenue estimates, and Ms. Bullion could tell you, she knows to a T, what the volume is on landings on average, the fuel surcharge costs, the volume of fuel we're pumping, and so there's a much tighter correlation between our budget and the actuals, and less of a fluctuation year over year. It's much more kind of linear, and so DLS is more comfortable with that as long as we've got the data and the information to back it up. But you do see in total, it is still slightly less than what we're projecting to be at this fiscal year.
Thanks.
Councilor Feldman.
Yes, thank you. I know that we have, as I am the counselor for Ward 5, I know there's a myriad of other, outside of the enterprise fund, conversations and meetings to discuss some of these issues in terms of the noise and what we can do in the community. But I had 3 questions while I have you here. When was the noise study that did not meet the threshold done?
So that would have been completed about 1.5 years ago. The results are on our website, and actually we just talked about this at the commission meeting because that did come up, the 65 DNL levels basically the 65 DNL levels is what we look at as the threshold for FA funding. So, for instance, with Massport Authority and Boston Logan, you know, at a time they did have sound insulation. They did do a full noise mitigation program because they did exceed those DNL levels that the FA will fund at. Because when our study was done, the results showed that the 65 and above DNL levels were actually all over the airport property, and none went into the community, even though it is absolutely felt and heard there is noise, but it did not meet those threshold guidelines. And so, again, the FAA will not pay for anything that is not below the 65 DNL. And so, just because we don't generate that type of noise or traffic, yeah.
Will there be another study conducted after the runway is extended?
We will do so as part of any project. We always undergo for the runway itself. It will go over an very complete, I will say, runway environmental assessment or impact statement. It depends on the amount that's required, and then if a noise study is required out of that will be done prior to the runway extension. So it depends on the environmental impact study, but based on the numbers over the past 2 or 3 years, I don't foresee that happening because the last time we were actually able to do a noise study was many, many years ago. And again, the noise study that I had requested to do with the master plan, in conjunction with the master plan, I had to request it 6 times because it was not fundable by the FAA, and DOT added it on after many, many tries. So, and that's something that the airport would not have been able to really pay for out of our capital budget without that funding.
You had also mentioned that, so we went from number 9 to number 2 in operations, and that's based on touchdowns and land.
That's based on total operations.
Total operations. And that was in 4 years, did you say, basically?
That was within 3 years, actually.
Within 3 years.
So I have not looked at the numbers for this past year, but I would assume it's still in line with that.
And what is the magic number of takeoffs that makes us number 2?
That was in totality in the state. So it was Boston, Bedford, us. And previously it was some of the other airports, such as Nantucket, some of the busier airports, which have commercial service, air carrier, air traffic. And so for us to, to come up to that number, again, it prioritizes us with the grant funding system and helps us justify certain things that we could not justify before because we were not seeing the operations, we were not seeing the numbers. So even state grants it helps out with, such as the noise study. We said that we are experiencing this much growth, we need a noise study. So it does help out with that type of funding.
Oh, no, I guess I worded my question. How many touchdowns and landing, or does that, like, what's the number? Like, I'm just wondering.
Yeah,
annually.
so I believe in 2018 it was around it was below 50,000, and right now it's around 85,000.
Okay, and one more really quick question. Councilor St. Hilaire had asked about the development and the restaurant, and I did have one of the business owners there questioned the current state of the restaurant building and its disrepair. I'm just wondering if there's been any, in the last couple of weeks, any effort to take care of just make it safe, because I guess there was rotting stairs with a soda machine at the top.
Yeah, that's been an ongoing conversation with the city because back before I was managing in 2018, the city and the airport underwent some sort of agreement to repair what is called Building 45, which is the Barracks building, in which the restaurant was in, and there was the police detectives unit was also occupying about 1/3 of the building itself. The city did state that they would be rehabilitating the space. The commission, the airport commission, is currently not, I would say, it's on the commission agenda to be discussed because those repairs still have not happened, and it's been at least 4 or 5 years. And so we are still waiting, I would say, for the city to make the improvements that they said they would do to that building, so it can be leased out and be used for its use. Right now, only 1/3 is usable, and we can't rent out the rest right now. So I'm still working with some of the city offices on making sure that that does happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. William? Thank you very much. It's good to see you. Don't be a stranger. Come back and visit the council and fill us in as developments
Absolutely.
occur at the airport.
Thank you, and feel free to email me or contact me with any questions. And of course, a lot of these issues around noise and environmental are very important to me. So I would love to meet with you at some point. So definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next one up is our Commissioner of Public Works, Mr. Collins. And not all budget pages are created equal. We just spent a half an hour on 5 pages. I'll let you math folks figure out at that rate. We have 36 pages left. So although I'll just leave it at that. We have some ground to cover as we approach the 9 o'clock hour. So let's start on page 71 with engineering. Good evening, Mr. Collins.
Good evening.
So on page 71, engineering through page 74, is there any prefatory comments you'd like to make before we jump right into the budget numbers?
No, just thanks for having me here. Welcome to 22 years of me, hence the cheaters this year. So
the glasses are new, I think.
Yeah, so I can see what the heck I'm doing. But engineering department. Sometimes get Eric to tell you the story of when I hired him as a co-op and told him how the next 10 years were going to go, and he said, "Yeah, right." And I said, "You're going to be the city engineer for us." And so went exactly as we had discussed when I first brought him in from Northeastern, and he's doing amazing work. He and the staff there are doing amazing work, and really significantly changed the organization personnel-wise within the department, making the best use of the quality staff we have there. And we have a few more tweaks to go before we get it fine-tuned. And we continue, as you see, the parking personnel is also within the purview of public services and engineering. We have some recommended tweaks that we're working with Mayor and HR on there as well. So.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to jump. What I'm going to do is take each of these sections in turn. So engineering, sanitation, highway, maintenance, take each of them as a block. So I'll just start with finance and property on these 4 pages of engineering, if you have any questions. Seeing none. Councilors, any questions? Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one question. It's account 53853, the consulting line.
What page?
Page 73. So it looks like, and this is versus actual spending as well, that the appropriation is going to be cut in half for that consulting line. Is there a project that is currently, consultants are undertaking in this current fiscal year that won't be taking place in the next fiscal year, or another factor that's driving such a big decrease?
Yeah, it's this probably isn't the case with most budgets, you guys, with the council reviews, that it's a little bit harder to follow what we do because things change so radically from year to year. So if you look at the original appropriation for last year's 40,000, and this year's 40,000. So we're appropriating the same amount of money. We just spent more last year because things happened. You know, as we run into, whether it be an environmental issue or some legal issue, some right-of-way issue, something always comes up where it was something that was otherwise unanticipated that we need a consultant for. So we try to budget 40,000 so we have something to work with, and if something happens in the meantime that's sort of out of the usual, we cobble together the money from other resources and spend a little bit more as we did last year.
And one quick follow-up question is that, so obviously the engineering department deals with a lot, I'm sure, as you mentioned, there's plenty of circumstances where whatever project comes up in a given year, there's a spike in any line of spending. Are you guys usually able to cover those increases intra-department and just essentially move on, spend money around elsewhere?
Yeah, again, you know, I think our budget is unique in total, and the public services in total, because if the city were to go into absolute financial free fall, we're the one budget in the city where you can say, stop spending, and it can save, you know, potentially millions of dollars, whereas you can't say that to police, fire, or schools, because it's all salary line items. We could stop building things. That's not great. It's not good for the city, not good long term. But that does give us a little bit more flexibility to where we solve our own problems. It's very rare, if ever, in the 22 years I've been here that we go and ask the finance director for help. And if we do need it, but more often it's the mayor and the finance director coming to us and saying, the city has a problem and we need you to solve it, frankly. And we've never had an issue with that, because when something's important to us and it needs to be done, I've never been told no by any administration, especially this one. You know, so we end up being the safety valve, I think, financially, but it's a good relationship. It's something it works well for both of us, for the city. I think it's a good way to operate.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, and obviously appreciate the good work that the engineering department and public services as a whole does for the city.
Thank you for that.
Councilors. Mr. Collins, just to follow up on Councilor Sweeney's question, do you know what that extra $40,000 or total of $82,000 was spent on last year?
Off the
was
top
it one
of my
particular
head,
item?
No, it's a number of small things. You know, there's a lot of little things that come up. We recently need to hire a consultant because we don't have the internal capacity to do certain things. We could do anything, but there's only so many of us and so much.
Nothing specific jumps up in your memory?
No.
Okay. Councilor St. Hilaire.
I did have one question on the engineering, Commissioner Collins, related to traffic enforcement. Just curious, how is that going since the transition to the engineering department? Is it going well? I mean,
Sure. It's you know, we completely reinvented the city. When I say we, completely reinvented how we monitor and enforce parking, and it's a lot of work. It's really a lot of work, and it also turns out that what we feel is perfectly logical as an approach to parking enforcement, the industry hasn't quite caught up to us yet. So we're pushing the envelope in some regards, and we work with some of the industry leaders in terms of equipment and software, and they're not sending humans to space anytime in the parking industry, I can tell you that. It's been tough. But we're doing a good job. I think that the staff we have is excellent. They're just the technology and we're trying to leverage. There's going to be a day when there's no such thing as a parking meter. Pretty soon, you know. We don't have the old school parking meters anymore. We have kiosks. Even the kiosks are clunky and antiquated. You know, we're just got to get to the point where it's all app-based parking. It's just this model is terrible. So,
I guess given that, are we generating revenue from this as well? This is an expense, but is there also corresponding revenue that comes in?
Yeah, there's a corresponding revenue line that we could dig out somewhere in the beginning of the book. not in the beginning.
We're required to take parking meter revenues into a special revolving fund, Fund 330. We do pull some money every year from that fund to support the general fund operations, but the money gets deposited in a separate fund, so you won't see it here.
A ballpark on what that looks like?
So keep in mind, we've been in a pandemic, right? And so even the data, even though this has been live for 3 years, we really don't have a 12-month set of data yet on activities. The whole kind of commuting that we were used to pre-pandemic doesn't exist in the same way that it did pre-pandemic. So we're continuing to monitor that data. But
Does
to
it
answer your
exceed-
questions in short, is we bring in about 300 to 400,000 a year in meter revenue and about another 200 or so, give or take, in violation revenues.
We've tried to keep the operation so it's relatively cost neutral. And, you know, but there needs to be continued investment in that, in the program, and that's why we're looking at maybe adjusting the rates. We have some pretty ridiculously low rates, and that doesn't help us maintain the program, so.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Bowen.
Thank you. I actually had similar questions, and because when I had looked, you were right, it is a very difficult budget to understand. And I think this is the time when we can get a better picture, both of what happened last year with certain lines and what's going forward. But so I was trying to piece together all the different parts of parking enforcement and saw that 300,000 was anticipated in revenue being transferred to the general fund. So in this line where it says these costs will be offset, I was assuming that was from the 300,000. This line is for 175,000. This line that I'm looking at is on page 73, the 52956.
Yep.
Parking and traffic operations contract. And then there is another 208,000 in staff, 50,000 in parking lot rents, supplies, uniforms, overtime, training. Were hard to piece together because I think they're sprinkled in lots of other places. So my question was sort of a general, like, what is the state of parking and the vision going forward? Because I think, you know, keeping parking rates low to help downtown businesses is a policy that makes sense, but pouring money into parking, it may not. And so I'm just curious sort of where you see that and how we can also understand like full areas of work in the city from especially something like this that actually has a revenue stream attached to it. Some other areas similarly are sprinkled throughout, so it's hard to know like how much are we spending collectively for this thing that we're getting as a city.
So philosophically, I think of bigger communities that have more of a demand for parking, like a Boston or Salem. You gotta go to Salem, you gotta go to the courthouse, you gotta, you know, there's so many reasons you have to go to Salem. So for Salem, it's a revenue stream. It's a significant revenue stream, multi-million-dollar revenue stream. In Boston, same way. I mean, you see, it's almost usury in Boston when you try to park there. For us, we look at parking as a way to manage parking demand in the downtown. So we look at parking enforcement as a way to manage the parking demand. We did an assessment a number of years ago, and we found that we actually have plenty of parking downtown, believe it or not, an excess of parking downtown. It's just not properly utilized. And 40 years ago, if you owned a business, everyone knew, don't park in front of your own business. In 2022, people aren't as smart, and they park in front of their own business and block their own front door, and their employees park in the street in front of their own business. So we have to then change our business model to force people to say, it's a lot cheaper to park in the lot right behind the business. So that's what we did. So we changed our parking system is designed to change the utilization of the parking inventory that we have and try to force people to do better things, which then increases the availability of on-street parking in front of the businesses and really helps everybody out. So it's not Our number one goal is not to generate revenue for the city. Our number one goal is to help the businesses thrive downtown by generating open parking spaces in the front of their front door so they can get high turnover. And in that regard, I think we've been very successful because the rates have been really cheap in the lot. And what we're seeing now, as Mr. Ailes said, it's been a very difficult time to assess the success of our program because something has happened at every year, whether it be COVID or you know, software changes or whatever it is. We don't have a clean year of data yet to really lean on and say this is how much revenue we can count on going forward. But like I said, it's just philosophically, we know where we stand. That we're looking to manage a system that really helps the businesses as much as possible. And I think that in that regard, we know we've been successful because you see more on-street parking available than before we started. We actually measured the utilization. We have a downtown parking and traffic study that we had done and showed really high utilization right in front of the businesses and very poor utilization in the main parking lots downtown. And we've been able to push a lot of that traffic into the parking lots. And it didn't take much, just took some subtle adjustments. And at the same time, we're trying to, in regards to one of the things that does help with revenue is we're also trying to help all those people that live between Cabot and Rantoul, who live between Cabot and Rantoul, and try to get the people who are commuting to Boston not to park their car in front of somebody's house all day long. Or if you're a restaurant worker coming in for a 6-hour shift, you're not going to park your car there because it's only going to cost you a couple of bucks to park in the lot. And so the way we're managing residential parking with the permit program seems to be reasonably successful. We're going to make some tweaks to it because we do learn as we're out enforcing. We have very observant enforcement personnel that give us a lot of great feedback, and we're able to tweak the program. And we've made some suggestions, which the mayor is going to put forward, or maybe has put forward, to make some minor tweaks to rates and to certain small areas, and to, really localized effects, and generally how we're going to manage what we call the red zone, which is where the resident parking is, to try to help out, free up that parking for its intended purpose, which is for the people who actually live on these streets between the business districts. So everything needs to be continually tweaked, and we do continually tweak this.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And so that's helpful to understand. And I think going forward, if the measure of success there is changing behavior and happy businesses, then would love to see in some of that tweaking, looking at, if we're not looking to bring in revenue, at least also maybe not increasing costs there. If, I could see investing a lot in enforcement to drive revenue, but if it's just small nudges to get people to change their behavior, just, signage and pointing people.
It does take enforcement. If you don't have the enforcement component, all of our analysis and all the studies and all the professionals we brought in told us if you don't have enforcement, you're really not going to get any turnover. So, and in order to do the enforcement effectively, because we're suffering from the same thing everyone's suffering from, it's really hard to find enforcement people. We need to continually invest in it. And the kiosks, as much as it's great to not be in the little clock spring business anymore of the individual parking meters, the kiosks are incredibly maintenance intensive. So we're really looking forward to that day in the future when it's all software and app based.
Just a quick comment about that, because my office is in Salem. Salem doesn't use kiosks. It's all software based. It's seamless. Works very well. So page 75, sanitation. This is our Rusco. It's only one page long. Any particular comments? We all knew that the rates were going to go up. Any questions from Finance and Property? Questions from the council? Council Bone?
Thanks. I just had a clarification question on the 2021 actual, because I was trying to understand, knowing that the rates have increased. And that number, there was a lower number in the enterprise fund on page 144, I think. And in the annual report. So I was just trying to, we don't need to answer it now, but I was just trying to look at some of these things over time, and that just was one that didn't match up.
Which line were you looking at, 144?
144 is the enterprise sanitation.
Let me see. It would be the 2021 actual for, let me find that page. For line 49710.
1251? Yeah, that's a great question, Counselor Bowen. I don't have the answer to that. This is a system-generated report, those numbers, because they're historical, but I will absolutely look into it and get you an answer.
Thank you.
It puzzles me. They should match up.
Thank you very much. Any other counselors? So we have a high school varsity math team member on the city council staff, and who ran some calculations while we were waiting. We've taken almost 20 minutes to run 5 pages. So at that rate, we have
This was
another.
based on your assessment of our airport enterprise.
Yeah, well, yeah, and so
My apologies, I had a lot of airport questions.
No, I know, I didn't want my math to sound wrong.
Building from that, we have 3.6 hours left this evening. So listen, all of these are important questions, just like what Councilor Broen brought up that wasn't caught before. So I don't certainly want to shortcut important questions, but I do want to disclose our progress for our own edification. Next item on our agenda is Highway, page 76.
And thank you for shouting out my math team experience. How exciting.
Well, and in fairness, Mr. Collins was supposed to have one evening to himself, as was Superintendent Dr. Trocek. COVID has its own way of messing with us. So we are where we are. I really don't want to shortcut on, an important review. Nevertheless, we do need to be mindful.
Nothing we like talking about more than the operation of our department, so, it doesn't have to be tonight, and I'm free anytime.
Thank you very much. Highway and maintenance, page 176. Any questions from 176 through 178? Any questions from finance and property?
76?
76, just 76.
Did I misspeak?
So 176.
Oh, yes, 70, excuse me, 76 through 78. Excuse me.
Things are getting blurry.
That's a reading question, not a math question. Counselors, any questions on finance and property? Seeing none. Yes, Councilor Rand.
Thank you. Really quickly, I'm just wondering if you've had, I see lots of vacancies, and I know you are always very committed to filling a position with somebody that you see talent in, who has multiple skill sets and can do things across, even not necessarily across departments, but around the city. I'm just wondering if you've had any success in increasing the salaries of any of the vacant positions? Is that something you've looked at?
Well, it's difficult because it's a union contract, so whatever we do could have ripple effects throughout the city, because if we give, say, for instance, a 10% raise, then you're going to have a bunch of cops and then firefighters and then teachers coming up here saying, well, we want 10% raises too. So it's a difficult market for everybody. We have made some hires, and it was great. Finally, got some hires in the door, and within a month, I had 2 guys leave. So, it's been really challenging. We're not alone. Every contractor I know is starving for help. I think we have excellent jobs because we can really, what we offer is careers, and we offer a permanent home for somebody. But even still, contractors are paying crazy money right now, and they cannot find help. So we've had a few new applicants in the last week or two, which is great, so, but it's been very sparse.
Go ahead, Councilor.
Just one follow-up comment is, I know you've heard me say this before, but I do think this city and your department would be great training ground for people just getting out of the technical school or other schooling. I
Yeah,
know that's
you know,
not necessarily the direction you lean in, but.
No, that's not necessarily true. Those people that are coming out of technical school have people standing in line to hire them. So it's a challenge. We've worked over this last year to try to develop a relationship with Essex Tech to see if we can get in line with. And two of my nephews are Essex Tech graduates, and I don't want to overstate, but it was life-changing for them, that experience at the Tech, and they're both incredibly successful now. And so I try to always tell them, find me kids from the Tech, send them my way.
Yeah.
We nothing more than, we love nothing more than to try to bring people into the industry.
That's great news.
But
Thank you.
it's very difficult right now.
It is, yeah. Thanks.
Councilor Sweeney.
Thank you. Just quickly, toward the bottom of page 79, there's a line number 55366, sidewalk program. It's small dollars compared to the total streets and sidewalks budget. I'm curious if you could elaborate on what this is and if that's part of the ADA compliance plan that's stretched over a number of years.
This ends up being, that 99% of what we do in sidewalk work is part of more of a citywide paving budget that gets, it's money that the council appropriates specifically for citywide paving. It's money we get from Chapter 90 and other sources. So most of the sidewalk work that gets affected in the city comes from those sources. And this ends up being more stuff that we do internally. The highway department tries to do a lot of sidewalk work internally, but it's more of those individual requests. Because if we had a contractor, 60,000 or whatever that is this year, 50,000, 50,000, that's, 3 or 4 addresses if we had a contractor do it. But if we use it to buy materials, then, because what happens during the course of the year, the things that we try to respond to is a resident will call us up and say, I find myself in a walker now, suddenly. I've taken an ill turn, and there's some really bad tree roots in front of my house. That's the kind of stuff we try to react to within days, because that's a real life-altering moment for that person. And we like to be there to be able to support them. So we try to use this line item to support those kind of immediate reaction items like that. And again, it's mostly materials we're buying out of this line item, because this does not go very far with a contractor.
Okay, glad to hear you guys have that capability.
Thank you. Councilor Bond?
Thank you. I'm not sure where it would be in here, but, so can't point to a line item, but I was curious about, we were speaking over the last month or so about stormwater, drainage, flooding, and in the capital improvement plan, it mentions $125,000 in drainage or stormwater work and $50,000 in brook clearing that are built into the operating budget. And so I was looking for those and was hoping you might be able to point me to them.
So some of what is in the capital expenditure plan is more hopeful, that's where we would like to, is what we feel should be put into the budget. It doesn't mean that it is put into the budget.
So is there money for
No.
drainage, stormwater, and brook clearing?
There is, any stormwater-related items are within the sewer enterprise fund. A number of years ago, Department of Revenue clarified that we could move, cities and towns could move their stormwater expenses to be housed within the sewer enterprise funds. So the City of Beverly did that. It used to be within the highway department budget, and we took those line items, lock, stock, and barrel, and moved them over. Did not move over, at that time, we had concluded several very high-profile watershed-wide drainage projects, multi-million-dollar projects. We didn't move the debt service over. That stayed on the general fund side, and those are probably starting to taper off in the coming years. But any new projects are carried over there. So if we look through the sewer enterprise fund, there are drainage line items there.
Which we will be getting to this evening
Sometime around
as we
3
move
a.m.
along.
Hopefully.
So I think we are done with the highway and maintenance section. We, with the assistance of Counselor Sweeney, have already moved into maintenance on page 79, which is pages 79 through 82. Questions from finance and property? Any questions? Counselor St. Hilaire, yes.
Just a small note on page 80, under the vehicle fuel line, 54810, I see a decrease there, and just given the state of gas prices, just curious why that's a decrease?
Well, compared to fiscal '22, it's an $8,000 increase in appropriation. So we're looking at it, we're looking at projecting out to close out this year is $45,000.
Okay.
So again, it's a little bit funny, because when you look at the number, what Munis does here is it's comparing the 2022 revised budget to the mayor's recommended budget. And so that's where you get a net 17% decrease. But if you look at what the council appropriated, what the mayor recommended last year, it's $42,000. It's an $8,000 increase in what was appropriated last year.
Do you feel like that's the right number? You feel good about that number?
It's closer.
Yeah, okay.
You know, anybody's guess. I mean, you know, on the way here, listen to the radio, the record profits for refineries.
Yeah. Council President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Collins. I just had a quick question on page 79 about line 53837, animal disposal. I'm just checking my own assumption that this is, I guess you can tell me, but is this, if an animal is hit on a road and needs to be removed, I'm assuming it's separate from anything to do with pest management, but is that correct?
Yeah, this is cats and, just to get into the sausage making of the business, cats and dogs are stored when we pick them up and cataloged, so if somebody wants to come and recover their pet, they can. A lot don't get, so we bring them to a crematorium.
Okay, thank you. I was just trying to sort of, in my own mind, determine if this was in any way tied to, I know the mayor has worked really hard with all of the departments on integrated pest management improvements, but this is a separate line. That's all I wanted to clarify, and I appreciate that.
No dead rats, just dead cats.
Very catchy.
Counselors? Seeing none, I'm sorry, Counselor
All
Bowen?
right, just, I did actually have a question to follow up on.
Go ahead.
On that one, because I've heard from residents that reporting dead rats don't always get picked up because of their size or location.
Yeah, we don't pick up dead rats.
Okay, and the health department does not either?
Nobody picks up just crows pick up dead rats.
Got it. That seems like an issue we should have a longer
We don't pick
conversation
up
about
rats,
outside.
squirrels, birds. You know, we don't pick up small animals like that. We never had, no city or town does. It's, they very quickly get taken care of by nature.
I did not know that. And then, my next question might be on a future page. What page are we going through right now?
We are up to page
82.
95.
So I have a question on page 81. Is that?
I may have lost track. One moment.
I think you had said through 82.
Yeah, we are up through page 82.
Okay, then if I may. The last line on page 81, the purchasing equipment capital outlay. This one seems to be one that fluctuates a lot, so I had a couple of questions. One, are there a couple $100,000 worth of purchases happening this month, or like, is that projection closer to reality, or the actual closer to reality so far this year? And then secondly, also looked at the capital improvement plan for what some of those costs were estimated for, like the replacement schedule, which seemed much higher, that if we were replacing 1-ton trucks at one a year, front-end loaders at one a year, medium-duty trucks at one a year, that it would be like $600,000. So I was just curious. It's
nowhere near what I need it to be, frankly. And that's That's not even one truck anymore. 280,000, it's just, it's nuts. I don't know how we're gonna survive with the current price of vehicles. Not that we can get them anyway, so.
And for the current year, what has that, there's like 139,000 so far in Munis, but still estimating that we would
Yeah,
spend the whole.
some of these, we do drag our feet till we can get closer to the end of the fiscal year before we sign the contracts, to make sure that the finance director and the mayor don't come to me with a disaster that we need to cover. So we sometimes, a line like this, we will wait them. Very often, the mayor will ask me to wait, or Brian will ask me to wait until after the turn of the calendar year, at the very least, to make sure that things are okay, that revenue projections look okay for the city. Because this is one of those places we could decide not to buy a truck. We don't like to do that, but we could decide not to buy a truck. It'd be a painful decision, but it's just, like, again, it's a safety valve for the city as a whole. So.
I'm going to break the hallowed Councilor Troubateris rule and go back for a moment. Mr. Collins, I let you know I was going to ask you a question about the cost of street maintenance. So I'm going to see if I can remember what I asked you and phrase it properly. If we assumed a point in time and for those who don't know, Councilor Troubateris' rule was you never go back once you move forward. So I'm going to break.
Yes,
it.
I was told that was not allowed.
I was going to say,
That
are you
was
going to
clearly
defend this?
You broke the rule, you're out of order.
I declare myself
rule
out
and
of
you're
order.
announcing it.
Nevertheless, I'm also chair. So if at some point in time we, as a city, had all of our streets in the kind of condition you'd want them to be in, some hypothetical point in time, what would be the cost, hypothetically, for us to maintain those streets in that kind of a condition on an ongoing basis?
It's a loaded question. There's a lot behind that. So let's just say, for instance, that we could make all the streets perfect today. They would score 100 for a PCI, Pavement Condition Index. That's probably not a great place to be in, because you wouldn't really have much cost incurred the first year or the second year or the third year. Then you would start to get into the preservation costs, which, you know, if you're looking at doing all 650 streets at the same time, that could be fairly significant. But then you're going to get into more expensive costs. And, you know, so just, we wouldn't like to manage in that way, because every street would hit the same threshold at the same time. So we would go from it would be very difficult to budget for, because we would have very minimal costs for a couple of years, and then they would ramp up and then become crushing costs. So the best, out of 100, I would say that, you know, a good goal would be, you know, 80, say, 80%. If you look at it that way, it'd be 80% of 100 for PCI. And at that point, maintaining level flight is going to take you probably, it depends on what costs continue to do, but, you know, it could be, I do think that you need even more spending now, which is a lot. So $3-4 million a year to maintain level flight going into the future. If we can catch up with the backlog of sidewalk and ADA work and get to a point where we're more, our program is very expensive, because we are building connectivity for the first time in many streets. We're building sidewalks, we're putting in curbing and drainage infrastructure that doesn't exist. So going forward, once we get all of that stuff in the ground, it will become a lot easier to maintain the road network in the city. But we're trying to leave a legacy of first-class road network, and we've gotten a lot done. The city has gotten a lot done with the council's appropriations. You can see that on Hale Street, on Essex Street, where these sidewalks never existed before, and they're heavily used. And the next iteration of maintenance out there, of roadway maintenance out there, is going to be far cheaper than what we had to invest in it for the long term. But we're also trying to build, we're using models of construction that we think will greatly extend the service life of these roads. And I've participated in some scholarly research. I won't say I did it, but I participated in the editing of some scholarly articles on that topic exactly, to see what level of investment it would take and what is prudent to do in terms of cost effectiveness over the long haul, and And the article proved that the approach that we're taking of spending more upfront to build a road to a higher level of service pays for itself more than 2.5-fold in the long run, with lower maintenance costs, the total cost of ownership goes way down if we can build a road that frankly lasts longer, which I know just makes sense intuitively. So I don't know that I answered your question directly, but because it's a very difficult question to answer, but like I said, one of the challenges we have right now is that we are building for the first time a lot of the things that this city should have done 70 years ago, 80 years ago.
Okay, given the hour, I certainly don't want to belabor the question or the point, so thank you very much. We are at page 83, snow and ice. And I would ask if we have any questions, that's through page 85, if we have any questions from Finance and Property. Seeing none, councilors, Councilor Rotundo.
Just one quick question, page 84, Commissioner. The sodium chloride budget went down considerably. Is there a reason to, I mean, obviously, we know it fluctuates, but that seems to be a fairly large, considering what our winters can be.
Yeah, the municipal finance laws around snow and ice are different than anything else, and they allow us to overspend those, and so that's one area that every city and town underfunds, and you just hope for a light winter. So, because once you increase these line items, you can't ever decrease them, no matter what. So it is, I would say we're intentionally underfunding it and crossing our fingers.
Okay. That's it. Thank
Councilor
you.
Sweeney.
Thank you. Building off of that question and response by Commissioner Collins for the department as a whole, if you can call it that. This is a question for Mr. Ailes. So with that mentality, which I understand given state restrictions, is there kind of in the back of your mind, in the event that we have a real busy winter, a planned reserve that funding is drawn from, for example, free cash, or do you look typically to try to find other unspent funds across public services to cover, you know, the inevitable in a bad winter?
The worst we've
increases?
had was 2015. We went over $2 million over budget, and it, you know, as Brian will tell you, the law allows you to carry that forward into the next fiscal year, which is unusual. And in that case there, I think we almost did it, but then we're able to, you know, pull off some magic and cover it within other transfers. You know,
Okay.
from, you know, a lot of it comes from the DPS budget. You know, we had a $300,000 overage this year. We covered it internally by shifting things around. Again, some of those vacancies help. You know, that helps us plug some of those holes. But there's a number of mechanisms that we've employed over the years. And that's about as bad as it got was 2015. It's about as big a hole as we got. We used to fund it about $375, and we would regularly hit $400,000, $500,000, $600,000. It sounds like a lot, but it's, you know, in the grand scheme of the city budget, it's usually something we can figure out.
Okay. Thank you. I think that answers the question, that, you know, barring a disaster, you can usually cover within the public services budget.
That's usually the goal. Like I said, you know, we pride ourselves in being problem solvers, and that includes for the finance department. When something bad happens to the city, we like to, I like to be the one that doesn't come and say, I have a huge financial problem that you need to solve. Usually it's the other way around, that we can help out.
Okay, thank you.
Other councilors? Seeing none, page 85, municipal garage, page 85 through page 87. Any questions from Finance and Property? Seeing none, other councilors, any questions? Seeing none, we will move to the cemetery budget on page 88, one page long. Any questions from Finance and Property? My colleagues? I have one question for Mr. Collins. That is, we have had over multiple years, $10,000 allocated to fence repair. And as I mentioned to you this afternoon, I was going to ask you this question this evening. And yet we've had no fence repairs. And the reason for that is what?
So
A word or two.
we used to budget $20,000 for fence repairs, and when I started, that was enough to get something done, as long as we did everything in-house. We did all of the work in-house. We just don't have the capacity to do it in-house anymore, and the budget got cut to $10,000, and that's really not enough for the type of work that we're doing, particularly when we're talking about the Central Cemetery steel fence. It's an expensive fence, and the $10,000 isn't really enough to get us going. And in the last couple of years, the costs have increased for interment and for cemetery services, mowing and whatnot, cleanups and mowing. So like this year, we have to take all of that money and put it towards cutting grass and interment services, because we didn't have sufficient funds to cover
There's just
that.
not enough money in the budget for this kind
Yeah,
of
so
work.
we've diverted those funds. Within the cemetery budget, we've diverted them to other uses, and particularly just maintaining the basic operations.
Okay, thank you. Counselors, any questions for page 88? Seeing none, we'll move to page 89 through 91 of the electric division in the city. Any questions from my colleagues on finance and property? Seeing none, Councilor Rand.
Thank you so much. Just have a general kind of streetlight question, but first want to comment that it's really great to continue to see the realized savings from switching over to LED. I love that. And then maybe just this one follow-up question is, I'm wondering if, I remember when we first talked about that, you said that we were sort of piloting this state-of-the-art dashboard that gives you control over the lighting and you can actually kind of turn down the lighting. I'm wondering if you've played with that and if you plan to and how.
We've played with it a little bit. One of the ways we play with it is just setting dimming schedules. So you can dim an LED light, really any light, but LEDs is where you play in. You can dim them up to 40%, and the human eye really can't tell. There is a separate dimming tariff that National Grid offers, but the frustrating thing for us is that the state hasn't caught up. The DPU sets the tariffs with the utilities, which is what we pay National Grid for the operation of the street light, because they don't have meters in them. We have meters in the street lights, so we know exactly to within 0.5% of how much electricity each street light uses in the city. The electric meter on my home and your home measures within 5%. So somehow our 0.5% accuracy isn't good enough for the utilities to accept our metering data, because what we're able to show us is we're paying a lot less for our electric bills than we used to. They have a very archaic billing system. It's taken a long time to catch up, but we're starting to see the benefit of that now. We didn't lose any money. All the money that we've saved since the day we changed them over is available to us as we go forward. But so National Grid believes that we're using something like 40% less electricity. We're able to show that, in fact, we're using about 80% electricity compared to what we were with the high-pressure sodium streetlights. We made a lot of effort to buy a very efficient light and operate them differently than they were before. So that's some of that system allows us to leverage it and get an almost 80% reduction in total energy. And streetlights were one of our bigger energy users overall. It's really schools. That's because they're giant. Public library and streetlights. And nothing has been as impactful as changing out those streetlights in terms of the city's overall sustainability and reduction in carbon footprint. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Other counselors? I don't want to belabor the point. We can actually take this offline, but I would like to perhaps talk with you about sort of dark sky ordinance and dark sky initiative. I believe that's something that you're interested in and supportive of. And to sort of follow up on Councilor Rand's question, having the ability to dim the LED lights sort of is perhaps a prerequisite, but certainly supports
Yeah.
approaching lighting that
I think
way.
everything we did, we bought at the time, and still today, the best streetlight fixture in terms of what they call the bug rating, the backlight, uplight, and glare rating. So it's the best dark sky rated streetlight on the market. We also chose a color temperature for the light of 3,000 Kelvin, which is as high as the Dark Sky Institute wants anyone to go. So we're in line with that. So we've done a lot as a city to adhere to those values that are espoused by the Dark Sky Initiative. And what we're working on now is an ordinance that will help first the commercial customers, because that's where the greatest light source is. It's not, it's not my backyard or your backyard. It's really these commercial parking lots and industrial buildings. So we're focusing on them to see if we can help really educate them to do the right thing. That's what we hope to do, and not just go out there with a billy club and smash lights. We want people to understand why it's important and do the right thing at first. So we are working on that. That is something that is we look forward to accomplishing hopefully soon. We had a good push on it for a few months, and I think we got
Busy with other stuff.
Yeah, that kind of happens.
Well, I look forward to talking with you, sort of offline on that. Any other questions on the electric division? Seeing none, the next item is page 92, Parks and Forestry. Through page 95. Any questions from Finance and Property? Seeing none. Councilor Wren, please, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm not really trying to make this meeting go longer, but I have a question specifically about tree maintenance, street tree maintenance. I just recently noticed that National Grid came around and cut, completely chopped up the trees that are near the power lines, and I'm just wondering how that affects our own budget for street tree maintenance. And I'm guessing that you coordinate, or at least the tree warden coordinates.
Yeah, it's a necessary part of National Grid's operations. It's one of those things, you either want electricity or you want trees, and they have to manage the trees around the power lines for the safety of the grid and for the safety of the workers. So they do go and they have a constant tree trimming program to try to better manage their assets so they don't get as many outages. They have an arborist, a full-time arborist. Their arborist works with our Forestry and Grounds foreman, Phil Klimowitz, very closely. They have a good relationship, and sometimes the work they're doing helps us out because it might be a hazard tree that we need addressed, and they incur the expense. So it is, you hate to see that where you got, this nice Norway maple, all of a sudden there's a big V out of it, and it just looks goofy. But that's sort of, that's how it goes. Sometimes these, most of the trees were planted under wires. The wires were there when the tree was planted, and that's why we work very carefully over the last, since Phil's been here. I've been here since 2000. He started a couple of years before me, and he's been very careful to choose the species of trees that won't grow up into the wires. And where we can, we try to plant large feature trees, but most of what he's planting are ornamentals that'll be appropriate for if it's on the wire side of the road. So that shouldn't be an issue going forward, but there's a lot of old maple trees out there that are just planted under wires, and that's life in the big city for them. It's, we'll just take a brief side note to say that it's been a tough 20 years for trees. We had the winter moth, which are finally gone, really, and they really stressed the trees out. We lost a lot of trees because of that. We are now seeing Asian longhorn beetles in Beverly. We're seeing we believe spotted lanternflies made it here, not en masse, but it's just a matter of time. These are some pretty devastating species. Emerald ash borer is in Beverly. Our ash trees are dying. And this year, there's a nematode which is attacking all the beech trees in the area. And the The tree industry is struggling to find a solution for the beech trees right now because it's very difficult to do battle with some of these microorganisms that are, if it's a bug you can see, but if it's a microorganism like a nematode, it's very difficult to treat the tree. And personally, that bums me out the most because those beech trees, the copper beech trees you see around town, are some of the most magnificent trees we have. So it continues to get more challenging for our trees. So.
Thank you for the information.
Just following up on the beech trees, again, offline, I do have some ideas about working with the Flint Trust for the Central Cemetery and speaking with Phil Klemowitz about possible ways of addressing the beech trees there. But
yeah, we're working with some of the local tree companies on treatments to see if we can salvage our trees.
Councilor Bowen.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up on trees. The tree replacement line on page 94 is a decrease this year. It's number 54602. And given all of that, was curious why that's lower. Are we expecting grant funding or other sources to help with?
So one of the things we do as part of our paving program, of our roadway program, within that citywide paving budget, one of the things we do on every road we pave is plant trees. So that's above and beyond what's here. So there's a number of places we try to fund it, and there used to be a mass relief grant, but I don't think that really exists anymore in the same fashion it did. But we really, what we're limited in tree planting by is capacity. So over the last 20 years, we've gone from planting about 100 trees to we're planting last couple of years over 200 to 250 trees internally, which is a lot. If you look at any other community, that's an exponentially higher amount than anyone around us. But that's what we can handle, what we can plant and manage, because we have to water them every few days to keep them. We put the tree gators around them, but we have to manage them to keep them alive for the first year. We have to babysit them, and that's about where we can manage. So we're not limited by funding right now, we're limited by manpower.
Thank you. Any other questions from councilors? We are done then with public services. I think we've advanced the clock on council president's calculations. So we are going to move to enterprise funds, page 129. The Water Enterprise Fund is where we are headed. And Mr. Collins, would you like to say a few words about where we are on water revenues and expenditures?
As Mr. Ailes has pointed out, the first page is backwards because it's revenues. We typically rely heavily for funding of the overall budget on permit fees and demand fees that we get from new construction. And it just so happened this year that we didn't really see that. We just had a pittance compared to what we usually see. So there's a fairly significant shortfall in revenue there. And we hope that the next year brings a rebound in that.
Okay. Mr. Ailes, is there anything you want to, as we're into the enterprise funds, please feel free to jump in if there are any things you want to bring to the council's attention, and for that matter, Mr. Perry as well. Any questions from members of Finance and Property related to the Water Enterprise Fund? Seeing none, councilors, generally, everyone knows what the Water Enterprise Fund is. Mr. Collins, I do have a question about this fund, which is, I understand water revenues, but where are the expenses going within the enterprise fund for the Water Enterprise Fund?
I'm sorry, where are the?
What is the nature of the expenses that draw down on the enterprise fund?
Operations. So same thing as any other, so personnel. So all the people that work in the water department. There's a transfer one of the bigger line items is a transfer to the general fund because my salary comes out of the general fund, but a significant portion of my time, Brian's time, the mayor's time, council's time, frankly, is taken up by just talking about water and sewer. So there's a transfer of some money out of each fund to the general fund, because that's, instead of trying to split up my salary and saying, well, 7% of my salary is water, there's a formula that is agreed to by DOR that comes up with a number that is transferred out. And then we have some contractors, we have some engineering services, we have significant engineering services that we, because we have to comply with a myriad of regulations at the state and federal level, and any construction, debt service, all the usual stuff. We have to buy the water, as Brian said, the water board. So we have to wholesale buy the water. That's our single biggest expense, is actually just purchasing the water, which is based on there's a complicated, not a complicated, it's a 3-year running average of total water usage between Salem and Beverly. We share the total cost of operations at the Salem-Beverly Water Supply Board, and we pay a percentage of it. So one of the things that we try to do is we try to use as little water as possible so that Salem pays the biggest share. And they're always the great big brother to us, and they take care of it.
Councilors, seeing no other questions, we are going to be, we are done with the Water Enterprise Fund and move to page 137 for the Sewer Enterprise Fund. And Mr. Collins, if you could just give a thumbnail sketch of what the Sewer Enterprise Fund, how it functions, what its purpose is.
Same thing, single biggest expense is disposal of sewage at the South Essex Sewage District. It's a multi-million-dollar bill that we get.
Payment to SESD.
Yeah. And then the rest of it is made up debt service and the operation of the department through capital improvement and just day-to-day operation of 30-odd pump stations around the city and 180 miles of sewer main. We have a very aggressive program of working through each section of the city, cleaning, TVing, and then rehabilitating the sewer system, including the sewer laterals, to try to keep extraneous water, rainwater and groundwater, out of the sewer system. So we don't want that good, clean water getting into the sewer. Then we have to go treat it over at SESD and get paid for it, and waste energy and chemicals treating it. So we try to keep that groundwater out and the surface water out of our sewer system. And it's a constant battle against gravity. So water still flows downhill, and but we spend a lot of time there. We're having a lot of great success. It's hard to measure because you can't, every year is different rain pattern, different groundwater pattern, but we've proven over the long term that the methods we're using are effective and saving us.
Thank you. Finance and Property, any questions? Seeing none. Councilors, any questions about yes, Councilor Bowen.
Thank you. This is where the question on drainage comes back, I think.
Yep.
And I did note the line 52911.
What page?
On page 141. Which has a $20,000 request for drainage work, but noted that was a decrease from previous budget, but an increase from what's expected to be spent this year. And was just hoping to hear a little bit more about, given the many requests for support on drainage.
Yeah, I mean, this is just more for repairs of, specific repairs on local drainage. You can't really do much drainage installation for 20 grand or even double that. So this is just to try to keep the infrastructure we have. You'll see above it, some of the line items, catch basin cleaning, and then this is a drainage repair line item. Then a couple of line items down, we have to dispose of what we take out of the catch basins. But that's just basic minor repairs to the system as it exists, not extensions or improvements.
Thanks for the clarification, and I just, given all we've heard about the needs in order to maintain our stormwater systems and all the pain points for a variety of neighborhoods. I was expecting to see more and thought maybe I was just missing it because it's difficult to decipher.
Yeah, I mean,
budget,
some of the
but
things, you know,
it sounds like that's just.
We're able
not-
to keep up the system by making sure our catch basins are clean. That's our first line of defense, sweeping the roads, making sure it doesn't get to the catch basins. If it does get to the catch basins, we clean the catch basins so it doesn't end up in the brooks. There's a lot of work that we've done over the last several decades of
We
removing.
did actually watch a full hour video on that, so I appreciate
Sure.
the work that goes into it. I was more asking where in the budget those priorities are reflected, and it sounds like these are the lines
Yep.
that I'm looking at. It's just, okay.
This is sufficient for us to maintain the system as it is, and then capital improvements are held off separately.
Any other questions? Councilor Rand?
Thank you so much. I just wanted to compliment you on the process you've been undergoing to really prevent groundwater and surface water from getting into the sewage system. I think that's always been actually, I think, fascinating on that whole process and preventing leakage into the pipes and things like that. I'm curious if you have a plan for addressing the Goat Hill infrastructure in general. Ward 2 has been very lucky to have a ton of road work concentrated in the downtown area, and especially Rantoul Street, you fixed a whole bunch of drainage issues. And I know Goat Hill has some of the oldest roads in our city, and I know from how you work, you like to completely redo. When you pave a street, you do it right, like you were saying. The way you're doing it makes it so that the maintenance going forward, it pays for itself, the level of the upgrade that you're doing, and I'm wondering if there's a plan for some of those upgrades to be done in Goat Hill.
Yeah, I think what'll kick it off is if and when the larger National Grid project kicks off, that's going to help us infuse a lot of money into the roads of Goat Hill and some of the other affected neighborhoods. So I think that'll be one of the things that we'll look forward to kicking off some of the repairs up there. Because there are, you know, there's not a neighborhood in this city that doesn't need a lot of work. And so it's hard to just single out Goat Hill, but it's certainly, they're going to be impacted by construction, and we're going to make sure that they come out of that construction in a much better way than they are now.
That's great. How old is the infrastructure under some of the streets in Goat Hill? I'm just curious.
Goat Hill's not really some of the oldest stuff that we have, believe it or not. Some of the coolest stuff we have is in Goat Hill. There's a tunnel underneath that goes from the beach at Gillis Park all the way over to Water Street. A 12-foot diameter tunnel. So that's pretty cool. But it's, you know, and believe it or not, there's been some, I believe there was a tragic fire on Cliff Street a long time ago, maybe the 80s. And so a lot of the water mains got replaced out on Goat Hill, because I'm guessing, I don't know details, I'm guessing that they had a problem putting the fire out. So I've noted that a lot of water mains did get upgraded out in Goat Hill. And the sewer infrastructure is, you know, most of the sewer infrastructure in the city was put in roughly between the 1910 and 1930s. So it dates back to that, most of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is, let's see, sanitation department, page 1, enterprise fund, that is, page 144. Through page 140, well, I guess it's just, yeah, page 145. Any questions from Subcommittee on Finance and Property? Councilors, any other questions on this? See none. We will move to page 146, the Enterprise Fund for Golf and Tennis Commission. Mr. Collins, anything in particular to add about what's going on at the Golf and Tennis Commission and vis-a-vis the Enterprise Fund? Highlights?
I believe their operations are going gangbuster. You know, golf's really made a comeback. I don't golf. I would have no idea how to do it. Don't understand the game other than hit a white ball into a hole. But apparently, they're really having a real resurgence in the industry as a whole. From what we can see, the company seems to be doing a great job there. We've spent a lot of time over the last year and a half working with a consultant on revamping, designing improvements to the golf and tennis clubhouse, because it's a real jewel. It really, but it's something that, at least I feel, and I think the mayor feels, that is underutilized as a city asset. It's something that it shouldn't just be there for golf. It should be a community asset that we can leverage. And so we've looked at the renovations, potential renovations of it, and we have no idea how we're going to fund the renovations of it, by the way, because it's expensive. But it's a building that really needs attention because the systems in it are in very bad condition. So I believe we've come up with a plan, at least architecturally, that will provide a commercially viable facility for the operators so they can make a lot of money there, because that's what we want them to do, make a lot of money so they can pay us a lot of money and pay back the loan that we'll have to take out to pay for the renovation. But also an energy sustainable facility, because we're designing the improvements to use all ground source heat pumps, so use a lot less fuel to heat and cool the building in the future. And it would be an appropriate architectural restoration back to more of what the building was like in the late 20s to early 30s. You can't duplicate it exactly, because there was a billiard room and a card room and things like that that just don't translate into 2022. But we can honor those things with architectural details and treatments and how we utilize the building. So I think if we can afford to move forward with that renovation, which right now we don't know how we're going to, that would really be a shot on the arm. It would make that almost a world-class golf course in terms of the facilities, the whole package. So that's the dream.
Thank you. Councilor St. Hilaire.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I share your view of the Beverly Golf and Tennis as well. It's another one of our unique assets that I agree is underutilized, and I think has the potential to generate revenue. And you know, it's also historic in nature as it relates to the United Shoe Company. And I just want to say I think it's in great shape, and I think they're doing a great job over there. That's really all I had.
Yeah, okay. I don't think if we're basically stuck with it, right?
Yeah.
We can't get rid of it, so we might as well maximize the benefit from it.
Great.
And I don't look at being stuck with it as a bad thing. It's really cool. We wouldn't otherwise have it, but it makes us unique. It's one of the many things that makes Beverly unique.
Great. Thank you.
Council President? No? Councilors, any questions? Seeing none. We have a couple of cleanup items here. Page 96, which is public property. This was referenced. I've forgotten whether it's Councilor Bowen or Councilor Rand regarding green initiatives. I'll give you a moment to get back to page 96.
That's, you know, we've been using that for things like car charging stations, or maybe a consultant to help us with some of these green initiatives. And we never really, I've been able to leverage state grants over the last 20 years to retrofit the HVAC controls in all of the school buildings and at the library and make some massive energy savings. Because we were so successful in those grant programs, they basically stopped giving us money because we took too much, and they're giving it to other people now. So we started funding this in the last couple of years as a way to continue that work, because believe it or not, a little bit of money can make a big difference in some of our energy efficiency initiatives, and that's, it's very effective.
Members of the subcommittee, Finance and Property, questions on public property, page 106. Councilor Rotundo.
I actually just want to make a comment. Out of everyone's budget, your budget, out of the whole entire public work is the only thing that has decreased. And I want to commend you for the work that you do for the city and the fact that the budget has gone down in all your departments. So it's just, I just want to recognize for the little amount of people you have and the amount of work you do to with the parks and the streets and the roads and the maintenance of the city. I just want to thank you.
I like to remind everyone that I don't do anything. It's, we have a staff of nearly 100 when you include the school custodians that do the work, and they're the ones that deserve the credit, because we have some true professionals that really pull off some amazing work here. So I'm lucky to be part of that team.
And I would just add that your answer that you just gave speaks to your professionalism and the way you approach the job. Kudos to you and the way you run the department. I'm once again going to break, because of breaking news today, break the Truba-Terrace rule and go back to the Highway Department just to ask you a question about the Hall Whitaker Bridge. I'm going to shoehorn that into the Highway Department question. The Hall Whitaker Bridge indefinitely not going to be available for vehicular traffic. Is there any update on what that's going to mean for advancing reconstruction of it, repairs? Do you have any additional information to share?
There's MassDOT is drinking from a fire hose right now. They just got a 1,200-page report that they're trying to digest, that they would normally, on any other bridge, take months to digest. The minute they open the report and do what we all do, go to the summary section, they said, uh-oh, we have a problem. And it's not going to get better, no matter how many times we look at this report. And so they immediately contacted us and said, we cannot sit on this information. We need to tell you, we need to bring you into the fold, and we need to act on it immediately, because it wouldn't be responsible to not act on it. So to their credit, as soon as they realized that they had new information that was telling them things they did not previously know. It's no secret the bridge is old, needs to be replaced. That wasn't a surprise, but the exact condition of it wasn't known until they did a really in-depth analysis. So they're going to have to close the bridge. My guess is that particular bridge will never reopen to traffic. It's not practical to repair the bridge, so it's going to have to be replaced. But that's just my opinion, sitting right here, knowing what I think is reality. MassDOT is still evaluating it to see if there's anything they can do, because they realize the impact of the community is great. So they're trying to see if there's anything they can do to maybe, put a bypass around it, put something temporary, just something they can do to try to relieve traffic in that area. They don't know yet. It's just there's too many moving parts. Even if they could put a bridge next to it, for instance, temporarily, like if you go up to Essex at the beginning of the causeway, they've got a Bailey Bridge they're putting next to. They put a Bailey Bridge on top of. That's a small little fixed span bridge, and it's nothing. But they put a bridge next to it. It takes years to assemble, to permit, to design, permit, and assemble a temporary bridge. So we're not going to see traffic over that anytime soon. Again, it's not a shock to look at that bridge, 1929. It's in the ocean. It needs to be repaired. So it's not a shock to MassDOT either. And over the last couple of years, they've programmed that bridge and the Kernwood Bridge into their replacement program. So it was already programmed for replacement. They hired a consultant, I don't remember exactly when, but maybe 18 months ago, to start working on the design of the replacement for that bridge. So they're already well ahead of where they would be had this just dropped into their lap today. They were already preparing for it, knowing that it was a priority. They were already preparing for the replacement of the bridge. So they're actively in design already for the replacement of it. That's still going to take a while, because bridges are they're not cheap, and they're not easy to build. But they explained to us that the impact of the bipartisan infrastructure funding legislation has had on them, and that has been invaluable to them in terms of their ability to react to situations like this. It doesn't mean the bridge gets replaced tomorrow, but it means that they can be more aggressive with their program and get a lot more done sooner. So they're I think we're gonna learn a lot from them over the next couple of weeks. But again, they're reacting in real time. They worked through the weekend to try to understand the report that they were given. Like I said, all things being equal, they would have taken months to review the report, because that's, most bridges aren't in this dire condition. This is really a unique situation through the state to have a bridge turn up to have a rating that is so deficient that it alarmed them to the point where they want to basically immediately close it. The biggest thing we wanted to know right away was whether or not they can maintain the bridge, because in the bridge world, if a bridge can't function anymore, a movable span like this one, it has to be open to marine traffic, not to vehicular traffic. So we asked, do you believe you can keep it in the closed position so pedestrians and bicycles can continue to access Ryleside, the train station and whatnot? They were still analyzing that. As of today, they believe they can. They believe that they'll be able to maintain pedestrian and bicycle access over the bridge and open it periodically for marine traffic. They're going to work with the Coast Guard and the city to see if maybe they can reduce the number of openings, because the bridge is in pretty tough condition, and every time you open it or move something like this, you're putting the bridge under stress. So,
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
more to follow.
Yeah, on this breach of the tributaris rule, going back to the Hall-Whitaker Bridge issue, any questions from Finance and Property? Seeing none. Other counselors who might be directly affected by it?
I've asked my questions already, so I don't want to continue the conversation here, because there's not really much more, because there's not a lot of information out there right now. It's all hypothetical, so I will wait till Commissioner Collins, as well as the mayor, starts bringing us more information.
Okay, Councilor
Thank you.
Thank you, and yeah, happy to wait until things play out. And when you get to that point, just would love to hear what the impact is on the planned Bridge Street.
It should not, it was independent of the Bridge Street replacement project.
Yep.
So the two are not, we don't operate, thank God, we don't own and operate the bridge. So it has no direct impact on us, and it really, I mean, frankly, if the Bridge Street reconstruction project stays on schedule, and the only thing that's going to throw it off schedule is we're having a difficult time adapting to some new regulations on the right-of-way acquisition. But we're still scheduled for a spring advertisement of next year. If the road gets reconstructed, there's going to be a lot less traffic on that road, and it'll be a lot easier to do. So in a way, hooray, I guess, but it's going to be a real significant impact for the city.
Go ahead,
I do,
Councilor.
Commissioner, obviously with the Elliott Street project, with the repaving, and this being closed, is that going to affect that?
Sure, we're big fans of paving on weekends and nights. I don't know if we're going to be able to convince our contractor to do this, so we're going to try to maintain our operations if we can after hours. We don't like nights, we like weekends a lot. So if we can cold plane it on a weekend, so the Elliott Street's a good example of all we really need to do there is replace the wearing surface. The curbs are there, the drainage is there, so that's a relatively quick and easy project for us. That's where we hope to be in the future with all of our roads. It's just dealing with the wearing surface. So there'll be some impact from it, but it's a big, wide street, affords a lot of opportunities for traffic management. So we hope to get that paved this summer and make our only route from the west a very comfortable ride. Well, now that, not the only route. Conan Street's nice and paved now, too.
Great. Thanks.
Yes.
Last question on this for me. Do you know if any city staff or DOT just by happenstance, has notified the yacht club, Bass Haven Yacht Club there, because it could certainly have a big impact on their launching season.
I mean, this is breaking news, honestly. It's tonight, you know, the press
Yeah.
release came out tonight. So this is the first time the public's really being made aware of what's happening.
I guess it'll be in the news, I would imagine it might be in the newspaper.
I would think, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, MassDOT has been excellent. This is not normal for them. You know, they maintain a lot of assets, and this is really a little bit jarring for them too, and they're very sympathetic to them. We have a great relationship with the entire MassDOT team, so they're great to deal with, and I have every reason to believe they're gonna do everything they can to help us out. They're looking at how to manage the boats that are upstream of the river, and they're looking at, you know, internally, they're looking at every possibility of how do we help out the yacht club, how do we keep them in business, try to understand their operations, who needs to get through that bridge, when can we figure out some, you know, different allocation of moorings or whatever, or some other service they can provide, and I believe they will. They're willing to be creative with us.
Okay, thank you very much. I know the night is still young. Mr. Perry, is there anything you'd like to contribute before we wrap up? Mr. Ailes? Our next budget review meeting is going to be next week, Tuesday, 22nd. This would be the public hearing on the budget. We'll be doing some wrap-up matters
Chair?
with,
Tuesday's the 21st, just so the public is not.
did I misstate?
You said Tuesday the 22nd. I just don't want the public to be confused about what day. So it's
Well,
June
like I said,
21st.
you know, the hour's late. Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I know there are a lot of people still watching.
You'd be surprised how many fans, right, Kim?
Yeah, so Tuesday, the 21st is the date of our next public hearing on the budget, or excuse me, will be the date of our public hearing on the budget. We will be doing some wrap-up matters with Mr. Ailes on debt service, annuities, pensions, benefit administration, and state assessments, which I think will close out the council's review of various sections, of the complete section of the budget. And then the following week, we will have, actually, excuse me, the very next day, June 22nd, Wednesday, the Subcommittee of Finance and Property will be meeting to take its votes on the budget before referring to the full council. Any questions? Hearing none, I would accept a motion from someone on Finance and Property to adjourn for the evening.
Motion to adjourn. Finance and Property.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. What about the Committee of the Whole? Is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a second?
Second.
We're going to leave you. Just leave you sitting here. Is there, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. We are adjourned.
Thank you.